That woman does not belong in this hearing.
Everyone watched the wrong woman. Leonard noticed the box.
How is that box here?
Naomi stayed perfectly still.
I did not come here for myself.
A red seal waited.
Please let the record speak.
And the moment Leonard saw that red seal, his practiced calm disappeared.
That seal was never supposed to surface.
Arthur sat trapped in silence.
I am still here.
His mind was still awake.
I understand what is happening.
Leonard controlled every word.
He cannot manage these decisions anymore.
He turned illness into weakness.
My uncle needs someone to protect him.
He called Naomi dangerous.
She is using his condition to get close to his money.
He still has the right to be heard.
She came to restore his voice.
The seal will be examined.
And its secret began 3 days earlier. The seal mattered because Arthur had tried to tell Naomi about it 3 days before the hearing, when everyone around him had already decided that his broken speech meant a broken mind. He was sitting in a rehabilitation room at St. Agnes Medical Center, his right hand resting weakly against a laminated communication board. The board contained simple pictures meant to help him choose water, food, pain medicine, rest, and family. Leonard had approved it because it made Arthur look helpless. It reduced a man who had built one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state to a row of small drawings that other people could interpret for him. But Arthur did not point to water. He did not point to home. He did not point to Leonard, even though Leonard had been standing nearby with the patient patience of a man performing concern for an audience. Arthur kept pressing one unremarkable image near the bottom of the board, a small brass lantern. The nurses assumed he wanted the bedside light adjusted. Leonard assumed he was confused. Naomi understood that Arthur was trying to reach a place that had been designed for exactly this moment. For nearly 40 years, Wren Meridian Industries had been known as Arthur Wren's Company. It had begun with a single machine shop on the eastern edge of the city and grown into a national manufacturer of building systems, public transit equipment, and low-cost modular housing. Arthur had become wealthy, but the company's most important story was never its market value. Its story was the people who had stayed when business was difficult. Welders, machinists, warehouse workers, clerks, maintenance crews, and families who could trace 3 generations of steady work back to the same factory gates. Arthur liked to say that a company was not a monument to the person who founded it. It was a promise made to the people whose hands kept it standing. He had put that belief into practice in ways that irritated investors and inspired employees. Wren Meridian maintained a housing division that built durable apartments for working families. It funded scholarships for trade students. It kept a medical assistance program for retired employees long after accountants argued that the expense no longer made business sense. Those choices were not sentimental accidents. Arthur had seen what happened when executives treated workers as numbers in a report. His own father had lost a job during a factory consolidation when Arthur was young, and the memory had stayed with him. Success, he believed, meant little if it required people who had given their lives to a business to become disposable the moment they became inconvenient. Leonard Hale had never shared that belief. He was Arthur's sister's son, and from the beginning, he had learned how to make ambition look like devotion. Leonard had joined the company 15 years earlier, after an impressive career in consulting. He understood market language, shareholder pressure, acquisition strategy, and the polished way successful people could turn a selfish proposal into a speech about the future. He could make a layoff sound like a rescue plan. He could make the sale of a neighborhood look like innovation. He could sit beside a worried employee, lower his voice, touch their shoulder, and leave them feeling that they had been heard, even while he prepared to do the opposite of what they needed. Arthur had noticed Leonard's talent long before he recognized the danger beneath it. He made his nephew chief operating officer because the company was changing and because he believed younger leadership needed room to grow. Leonard rewarded that trust by becoming indispensable. He learned every division, befriended board members, cultivated bankers, and placed loyal executives in positions where they could control the flow of information. By the time Arthur began asking difficult questions about certain transactions, Leonard had already built a circle around himself. The conflict between them had started quietly. Leonard wanted to sell Ren Meridian's housing division to a private investment group called Horizon Vale Partners. The sale would be described as a strategic restructuring. Investors would receive a large immediate return. Ren Meridian would become leaner, more profitable, and easier to reposition for a future public offering. Leonard spoke about the proposal as though it were the only rational answer to a changing economy. Arthur saw something else. He saw rents rising, workers being pushed farther from their jobs, and an entire mission being handed to people who had never cared about it. He knew Horizon Vale had a record of buying affordable properties, cutting maintenance, raising fees, and selling them again when the numbers improved. He also knew that once the division was gone, it would never return. For 2 years, Arthur refused to approve the sale. He delayed meetings, requested independent reviews, and kept his voting shares locked behind a trust structure that made a quick takeover difficult. Leonard smiled through every disagreement. In public, he praised his uncle's wisdom. In private, he began preparing for the day Arthur could no longer stand in his way. That day appeared to arrive on a cold Sunday morning in early March, when Arthur suffered a stroke. The stroke did not take his memory. It did not erase his judgment. It damaged the part of his brain that helped turn thoughts into spoken language. The doctors explained that he had aphasia, a condition that could make it painfully difficult to find words, form sentences, read quickly, or answer questions under pressure. To anyone willing to slow down, use written choices, allow time, and listen beyond speech, Arthur remained unmistakably himself. He recognized people. He understood documents. He reacted strongly to business news. He could point to figures, write fragments, and signal agreement or refusal with remarkable precision. But aphasia was a condition Leonard could exploit because it was easy to misunderstand. When Arthur struggled to answer a question in the hospital, Leonard would gently explain that his uncle had become confused. When Arthur tried to push away papers, Leonard would say he was agitated. When Arthur stared at a visitor with anger because he could not express what he wanted, Leonard would tell the visitor that the stroke had changed him. The people around Arthur were not cruel. Most were simply busy, worried, and unfamiliar with the difference between a person who cannot communicate in the usual way and a person who cannot think. Leonard made that confusion useful. Within days, he arranged for himself to control Arthur's schedule. Visitors had to be approved through Leonard's office. Phone calls were screened. Longtime employees who came to see Arthur were told that he needed quiet. Board members received carefully edited medical summaries. Even Arthur's home staff were warned that too much stimulation could endanger his recovery. Every restriction sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a wall. Naomi Reed saw the wall before anyone else did. She had not been a senior executive at Ren Meridian. She had never attended shareholder dinners, or appeared in annual reports. For most of her career, Naomi had worked in the Records and Preservation Department, a small office in the oldest building on the company campus. Her work involved minutes from board meetings, trust amendments, land deeds, historical contracts, environmental reports, employee pension records, and the delicate task of deciding what should be protected when everyone else wanted more space. It was work that made powerful people impatient. They wanted files quickly. They wanted old disputes forgotten. They wanted signatures without context and summaries without inconvenient attachments. Naomi had learned that the most important document in a room was often the one someone called outdated. She had come to Ren Meridian in her 20s after her father injured his back at the factory and could no longer work steady shifts. Her father had been proud of the company even when it failed him. He kept a photograph of Arthur shaking hands with a line of welders after a contract victory, and he told Naomi that men like Arthur were rare because they still remembered the names of people who worked below them. Naomi did not romanticize the company. She knew its history included mistakes, layoffs, and decisions that hurt people. But she also knew Arthur and his late wife, Beatrice, had spent decades trying to build safeguards against the kind of greed that could erase a company's conscience in a single board meeting. Beatrice had been the first person at Ren Meridian to treat Naomi's work as something more than storage. She had a scholar's mind and a practical understanding of human weakness. She believed that people often behaved honorably when circumstances were easy, but true character appeared when money, illness, inheritance, and fear entered the same room. Years before Arthur's stroke, Beatrice had begun building a separate system for critical records. She called it the Lantern Archive because, in her words, hidden things should have a light kept for them. The archive was not a secret fortune or a private collection of gossip. It contained certified copies of documents that could matter if family pressure, corporate pressure, or medical crisis ever placed Arthur's intentions at risk. Arthur agreed because he understood what Beatrice was protecting. He had seen families tear themselves apart over a will. He had seen elderly founders surrounded by advisors who suddenly became experts on what was best for them. He had seen how quickly a person's own wishes could disappear once people decided that age, illness, or slow speech made those wishes inconvenient. The Lantern Archive was lodged not in Ren Meridian's offices, but in the county's restricted records repository. The company kept reference copies, but the certified originals were stored under a protocol requiring a court order, an independent records officer, and a documented chain of custody. Naomi had helped organize the material, but she could not open it alone. No one could. That was the point. Leonard knew the archive existed. Naomi was certain of it. He had attended the meeting years earlier, when the capacity safeguards were discussed, although he had acted bored at the time. He had called them overly cautious and expensive. Beatrice had smiled politely, then asked that his objection be entered into the minutes. After Arthur's stroke, the first sign that Leonard was moving against Naomi came quietly. 2 folders vanished from the company records room. They were not dramatic files. One contained old board resolutions related to Arthur's voting shares. The other held correspondence about the Lantern Archive. Naomi noticed because she knew every box number and accession date. When she asked the new compliance manager about the missing folders, she was told that Leonard had ordered a document review. 3 days later, Naomi was informed that her position had been eliminated in a restructuring. The letter was efficient and cold. It praised her long service, offered a severance package, and required her to return all company property. It also contained a warning that unauthorized retention or disclosure of internal materials could lead to legal action. Naomi understood the message beneath the formal language. Leonard was not simply removing her from payroll. He was making sure that if she spoke up, people would assume she had stolen something. She went home that afternoon carrying an empty cardboard box. In the box were a framed photograph of her father, a small brass paperweight shaped like a lantern, and a note Beatrice had written years earlier after Naomi stayed late to recover a damaged pension ledger. The note thanked her for believing that records were a form of respect. For 2 weeks, Naomi did nothing, not because she did not care, but because she knew that rushing toward a man like Leonard would only give him the story he wanted. He needed her to appear emotional, resentful, and unstable. He needed the court to see a dismissed employee rather than a witness to something larger. Then Arthur's old driver called her from a number she did not recognize. The driver had worked for Arthur for 27 years. He sounded frightened. Leonard had reassigned him, but he had seen Arthur during a transfer between appointments. Arthur had struggled to hold a notepad. On it, he had drawn a rectangle, a red circle, and a small lantern. The driver did not understand, but he remembered Naomi had once spoken about old company records. He thought she might. Naomi understood immediately. The rectangle was a document box. The red circle was a seal. The lantern was the archive. She contacted Daniel Park, the attorney the probate court had appointed to represent Arthur's interests in the guardianship case. Daniel was not Leonard's lawyer and not Naomi's ally. He was a careful attorney with a reputation for taking difficult cases seriously. But when Naomi first called, he sounded tired. He had already reviewed the medical report from Dr. Martin Vale, a respected neurologist, who concluded that Arthur could not make complex decisions. He had also listened to Leonard's account of a confused old man being manipulated by a former employee. Daniel agreed to meet Naomi only because Arthur's driver had independently confirmed the strange drawing. Naomi did not try to impress him. She did not pretend to have answers she did not possess. She placed copies of her employment records, the severance letter, the archive protocol, and a timeline of missing files on the table between them. She explained what aphasia was. She explained why a hurried verbal examination could not determine whether Arthur understood financial decisions. And she explained that the Lantern Archive might contain documents relevant to any attempt to take control of Arthur's property. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked the question Leonard had wanted everyone to ask. Why should anyone believe a fired records employee over a nephew, a doctor, and a board of directors? Naomi answered that they should not believe her because she was fired. They should verify the record because the record either existed or it did not. That answer changed something. Daniel checked the county repository. The Lantern Archive was real. Its access conditions were real. And most importantly, a limited request for emergency guardianship had been filed by Leonard only 48 hours after the first scheduled board discussion of the Horizon Vale sale. The timing did not prove wrongdoing, but it made the request impossible to ignore. The guardianship petition was written to sound compassionate. It described Arthur as vulnerable, confused, and unable to understand the consequences of business decisions. It argued that without a responsible family member in charge, Arthur's health and assets could be endangered. Leonard offered himself as the obvious solution. He claimed he had no conflict of interest because he sought no personal gain and only wished to preserve the company his uncle loved. What the petition did not mention was the vote. Arthur's shares represented enough voting power to block the sale of the housing division. If a guardian controlled those shares, the board could approve the deal. If the deal went through, Horizon Vale would pay advisory fees to several outside firms. One of those firms, according to a thin thread Daniel found in public business filings, was connected to a company called Northwatch Strategies. Northwatch Strategies had been formed 6 months earlier by Leonard's former college roommate. It had no public website, no employees listed beyond a mailing address, and no history of major consulting work. Yet it had suddenly been named as a strategic transition advisor in preliminary documents related to the potential sale. Daniel did not accuse Leonard immediately. He knew better. A suspicious company was not proof. A coincidence was not proof. But the pattern was beginning to form. The day before the probate hearing, Daniel petitioned Judge Imani Cole for authority to inspect the Lantern Archive under the court's supervision. Leonard objected through his counsel, arguing that old documents would only distract from Arthur's present medical condition. He also claimed that Naomi had manufactured the entire issue because she resented losing her job. Judge Cole did not approve a full release. She allowed a narrow preliminary inspection by the county records officer, Daniel, and counsel for both sides. Naomi could attend only as a factual witness because she had helped organize the archive. The limitation frustrated her, but it also protected the process. The evidence had to survive more than outrage. It had to survive scrutiny. At the county repository, the red-sealed box was brought from a climate-controlled shelf behind 2 locked doors. The records officer read the accession number aloud. Daniel verified it against the court order. Leonard's attorney watched every movement. Naomi stood with her hands folded, afraid to breathe too loudly. Inside the box were several folders, each stamped with dates and certification marks. The first contained Arthur's Capacity Safeguard Directive, executed 7 years earlier. It did not declare that Arthur would always be competent. It did something more careful. It required that if he ever suffered a condition affecting speech or conventional communication, any assessment of his decision-making ability had to include a qualified specialist familiar with supported communication methods. It also required that no family member with a financial interest in a pending corporate transaction could be appointed to control his voting shares without an independent review. Leonard's attorney dismissed the directive as old planning material. Daniel did not. The document was signed, witnessed, and properly certified. More damaging still, Leonard's name appeared on the final page. He had signed as an acknowledging witness. The second folder contained a limited trust amendment. Arthur had placed a portion of his controlling shares into a protective arrangement designed to prevent a guardian from using temporary medical vulnerability to force a corporate transaction. If Arthur could not communicate, the shares were not to be handed automatically to a relative. They were to be placed under a neutral fiduciary until Arthur's capacity had been properly assessed through the protocol he had chosen. The third folder was more troubling. It included minutes from a private meeting held after Leonard had once asked Arthur to sign broad proxy forms during a period of illness 3 years earlier. Arthur had refused. Beatrice had insisted that the conversation be documented. The minutes did not call Leonard a criminal. They did not predict the future. They simply recorded that Arthur was concerned about pressure from people who might benefit from his inability to participate fully in company decisions. That concern had been sealed with the rest of the archive, because Beatrice believed it could become a family weapon if it were made public too soon. At the end of the inspection, The records officer discovered a fourth folder that had been marked for release only if a petition for guardianship was filed by a person named in the earlier documents. The folder was still sealed in red wax. That was the box Naomi carried into court. Leonard had not expected it to appear. He had expected the archive to remain locked behind procedure long enough for him to gain emergency control. He had expected Arthur's silence to do the work for him. And when he saw the red seal in Naomi's arms, he understood that the courtroom was no longer a place where he could control every question. Judge Cole did not open the sealed folder that first morning. She ordered a short evidentiary hearing, required the parties to submit the materials for verification, and appointed an independent communication specialist to evaluate Arthur. It was not the victory Naomi wanted, but it was the first time in 6 weeks that Arthur's condition would be examined without Leonard deciding what his silence meant. As court recessed, Leonard walked past Naomi without looking at her. His face had returned to its public expression of patience and grief, but his hands were clenched hard enough that the skin around his knuckles had turned pale. Naomi watched him leave and felt no satisfaction yet. The red seal had not proved anything. It had only bought time. And time was exactly what Leonard had been trying to steal. The 48 hours that followed were the longest Arthur had spent without Leonard controlling the story told about him. For the first time since the stroke, people entered his room without first asking Leonard whether the visit was necessary. The independent specialist appointed by Judge Cole was Dr. Alina Mercer, a neuropsychologist whose work focused on assessing decision-making ability in people with aphasia, traumatic brain injury, and other communication disabilities. She did not arrive with a stack of rapid-fire verbal questions and a stopwatch. She arrived with a tablet, written options, visual scales, financial summaries formatted in plain language, and the patience to let silence mean thought rather than failure. Dr. Mercer spent nearly 4 hours with Arthur over 2 sessions. She asked him to identify people he trusted, explain the purpose of his major holdings, recognize the difference between selling an asset and granting someone control over it, and indicate whether he understood the consequences of a guardian voting his shares. She used yes or no confirmation methods, written keywords, picture-supported questions, and repeated checks to make sure a gesture was not being misunderstood. Arthur was slow. Sometimes he became exhausted and had to stop. Sometimes a word appeared on his screen only after several attempts, but the substance of his answers was consistent. He knew the value of his principal assets. He knew the proposed Horizon Vale transaction. He recognized Leonard's role in it. He understood that a guardian could make choices he did not want. And when asked whether he wanted Leonard to control his health decisions or voting shares, Arthur rejected that choice with a clarity that no one in the room could honestly misread. That conclusion did not end the case. Leonard's lawyers argued that capacity could fluctuate and that the complexity of a corporate sale required more than basic understanding. They suggested that Arthur's refusal of Leonard was emotional, influenced by Naomi, and not a reason to leave important decisions unprotected. Their strategy was subtle. They no longer needed to prove Arthur was completely unaware. They only needed to persuade the judge that fear and complexity justified taking control away from him. Daniel began with the independent report. He walked the court through the difference between speech impairment and impaired reasoning. He emphasized that Arthur did not need to prove that he could speak like he had before the stroke. He needed only to show that he could understand and communicate decisions through methods appropriate to his condition. The law was not supposed to reward people for refusing to provide the support that would allow a disabled person to be heard. Leonard's attorney attacked the report carefully. He pointed to Arthur's fatigue. He questioned whether visual aids had made the answers too simple. He noted that Dr. Mercer had met Arthur after Naomi raised concerns, implying that the entire evaluation had been shaped by a former employee's agenda. He tried to turn every accommodation into proof of manipulation. Dr. Mercer did not become defensive. She explained that accommodations did not put thoughts into Arthur's mind. They removed barriers that prevented other people from hearing thoughts already there. She explained that a person using glasses was not being coached to see, and that a person using an interpreter was not being coached to speak. The same principle applied to supported communication. At first, Dr. Vale appeared confident. He had years of clinical experience and a respected private practice. His original assessment was concise, formal, and built around familiar categories. Arthur had failed to answer certain verbal questions quickly. He had struggled to repeat phrases. He had become frustrated during testing. Dr. Vale had concluded that these failures indicated substantial cognitive decline. Daniel did not accuse him of lying. Instead, he asked what methods he had used to distinguish aphasia from loss of executive function. Dr. Vale acknowledged that he had not used a communication board, written choice assessment, extended response time, or consultation with a speech-language specialist. He said the setting had been urgent and that he relied on professional judgment. Daniel then asked whether Leonard's office had arranged the assessment and whether Leonard had remained nearby during portions of the examination. Dr. Vale said yes. He explained that Leonard had been concerned about Arthur's agitation and wanted the process completed quickly. The next question changed the air in the room. Daniel asked whether Dr. Vale had disclosed a consulting agreement between his clinic and Northwatch Strategies. The agreement had been found in documents produced after the court ordered a limited financial disclosure. It was not a direct payment for the guardianship opinion. That would have been too obvious. Instead, Northwatch had retained Dr. Vale's clinic months earlier to provide executive wellness consulting for a future transition project. The work had not yet begun in any meaningful way, but the contract promised a substantial fee if the Horizon Vale transaction closed. The capacity directive from the Lantern Archive showed that Leonard had known about the safeguards. The trust amendment showed he could not automatically control Arthur's shares if he stood to gain from a pending transaction. But Leonard continued to deny that he had any personal interest in the Horizon Vale sale. He claimed Northwatch was an outside consultant chosen by the buyer. He claimed he had no ownership in it, no promised payment, and no reason to want the vote outcome beyond the good of the company. Then Daniel introduced the records obtained through the court-supervised review of Ren Meridian's transaction files. They were not sensational documents. There was no single email in which Leonard confessed to stealing from Arthur. There was no recording of him laughing about his uncle's stroke. The truth arrived in the way real financial deception often arrived, through dates, signatures, spreadsheets, and words that had been chosen too carefully. The first document was an early draft of the Horizon Vale term sheet. In its original form, Northwatch was listed as an independent transition advisor. In a later version, a small notation appeared in the payment schedule. It referred to an incentive allocation for a beneficial participant identified only by initials. Daniel displayed a separate compliance questionnaire signed by Leonard during negotiations. On that form, Leonard had answered that he had no direct or indirect financial interest in any outside party connected to the transaction. The initials in the incentive schedule matched Leonard's full legal name. Leonard's attorney objected immediately. He argued that initials were ambiguous. Daniel agreed that, standing alone, they could mean many things. He then introduced a second document, a private side letter between Northwatch and a holding company called Hale Family Ventures. The holding company was not listed on Ren Meridian's public disclosures, but corporate registration records showed that it was controlled by a trust established for Leonard's children. The side letter promised that if the sale closed, Hale Family Ventures would receive a percentage of Northwatch's success fee. The payment would not go directly into Leonard's personal account. It would flow through a family trust designed to make the connection difficult to see at a glance. That was not merely a conflict of interest. It was the exact type of indirect financial benefit Arthur's trust amendment had been created to prevent. Leonard's expression did not collapse. He was too disciplined for that. But the rhythm of his composure changed. He began consulting with his lawyer more often. He stopped looking at Arthur. And for the first time, the people who had believed his story could see the outline of the trap he had built. Daniel continued. The next record showed that the guardianship petition had been prepared using information from a draft proxy package. The proxy package was dated 4 days before Leonard filed in court. It assumed that someone other than Arthur would control his voting shares at the upcoming board meeting. It did not name Leonard directly, but the instructions matched the authority he sought in the guardianship petition. Leonard had not simply responded to a medical crisis. He had begun arranging the corporate consequences of Arthur's incapacity before a judge had ever examined whether Arthur was incapable. Judge Cole asked whether there was evidence Leonard had discussed the proxy plan before Arthur's stroke. Daniel said there was not. He did not exaggerate. The court could not punish a man for plans that had not been proven. But the sequence after the stroke was enough to show urgency of a different kind. Leonard had treated Arthur's illness as an opportunity before he treated it as a human tragedy. At that point, the county records officer was called forward with the final red-sealed folder from the Lantern archive. The procedure was slow by design. The officer identified the accession number, confirmed the court order, and described the condition of the seal. Daniel and Leonard's counsel examined it. Judge Cole asked whether either party disputed that the seal had remained intact since it was placed in county custody. Neither did. When the officer broke the wax, the sound was quiet. It was not the sound of a dramatic weapon being drawn. It was the sound of a barrier giving way after years of pressure. Yet every person in the courtroom heard it, because Leonard had spent the entire case trying to make sure that folder remained closed. Inside was a memorandum prepared jointly by Arthur and Beatrice 7 years earlier, along with a notarized statement from the attorney who had advised them at the time. The memorandum described an incident involving blank proxy forms and a proposed transfer of authority. Leonard had approached Arthur during a period of illness following surgery and urged him to sign documents that would allow Leonard to act quickly in corporate matters. Arthur had refused after reading the papers. Beatrice had been disturbed enough to insist on a written record. The memorandum did not claim Leonard had committed a crime then. It stated that Arthur believed Leonard had minimized the scope of the proxy forms and had become angry when asked to wait for independent counsel. Because the family chose not to make the matter public, the documents had been stored in the Lantern archive as part of Arthur's future capacity planning. Attached to the memorandum was a statement of intent signed by Arthur. It said that if any future health condition limited his speech or mobility, he wanted the people around him to distinguish between inability to perform quickly and inability to decide. It stated that he did not want Leonard appointed as guardian proxy, conservator, or controller of his voting shares without an independent review, particularly if Leonard could benefit from a company transaction. Leonard had signed an acknowledgement that he had received notice of this statement. That signature was the moment his defense became almost impossible to sustain. For weeks, he had told the court he believed he was the natural person to take charge because Arthur had never expressed any other preference. He had sworn that he knew of no binding instructions limiting his role. Now the court had certified documents showing that he knew exactly what Arthur wanted and had been warned years earlier that he was not to use illness as a path to control. The damage went beyond the guardianship case. It reached his credibility in every statement he had made under oath. Judge Cole did not rush to pronounce judgment. She reviewed the materials, asked questions about dates, and gave Leonard's attorney time to respond. The lawyer argued that the old memorandum reflected a family disagreement, not a legal finding. He argued that Leonard's signature on an acknowledgement did not mean he remembered every provision years later. He argued that his client's concern for Arthur could still be genuine, despite an undisclosed financial interest. Some of those arguments were not absurd. That was what made the case important. Justice did not require pretending that every difficult family conflict had a simple villain. It required looking at the entire pattern. The pattern was what condemned Leonard. Arthur's speech had been impaired, but he had been denied meaningful accommodations. Leonard had sought emergency control at the exact moment Arthur's shares mattered most. Leonard had withheld capacity safeguards that named him as a conflicted party. His doctor had failed to disclose a financial relationship connected to the transaction. A hidden family trust stood to profit from the sale. And the sealed record established that Leonard had been warned years earlier that Arthur feared exactly this kind of pressure. Taken together, it was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. Before Judge Cole issued her decision, she asked Arthur whether he wished to make his own preference known. Arthur's communication tablet rested on the table in front of him. Dr. Mercer sat nearby but did not touch it. Arthur looked at the screen for a long time. His left hand moved slowly, selecting letters one by one. He paused. He deleted a letter. He began again. No one hurried him. No one interpreted the silence for him. For the first time since his stroke, the entire room waited for Arthur at Arthur's pace. When he finished, Dr. Mercer verified the message with him using a second method. Arthur confirmed that he did not want Leonard to make decisions for him. He confirmed that he wanted independent assistance while recovering. And he confirmed that he wanted the housing division protected until he could participate fully in any decision affecting it. The meaning was simple. Arthur had never asked to be rescued from his own life. He had asked to be heard. Judge Cole denied Leonard's petition for emergency guardianship. She found that Arthur had demonstrated decision-making capacity with appropriate supports, and that Leonard's undisclosed financial interests created a serious conflict. She ordered that no one could exercise authority over Arthur's personal voting shares without further court approval. She directed the parties to implement a supported decision-making plan, including access to independent medical, legal, and communication professionals. She also ordered the record transmitted to the appropriate authorities for review of possible false statements in the guardianship petition, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and financial misconduct connected to the proposed transaction. The order did not declare Leonard guilty of crimes. It did something more immediate and more devastating. It removed his ability to hide behind the appearance of concern. The court had not sent him away in handcuffs. There was no satisfying instant punishment. Instead, the court had ordered Leonard to be released. He was to be released on bail. 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 He was to be releas No sudden collapse under flashing cameras. Leonard left the courtroom surrounded by lawyers, his face pale and controlled. But the world he had built depended on people believing that he was trustworthy. That belief had been broken in public by the very process he had tried to use as a weapon. The consequences unfolded over the following months. Ren Meridian's board placed Leonard on administrative leave while an independent investigation began. Several directors who had accepted his version of events admitted that they had not asked enough questions about Arthur's condition or the Horizon Vale proposal. The sale was halted. The company's compliance office discovered that Northwatch had been included in internal planning long before it had been properly disclosed. Investigators traced the expected success fee through Hale Family Ventures and found additional communications showing that Leonard had pressed staff to speed the guardianship filing before the board vote. Dr. Vale faced a separate professional review. His report was not treated as worthless simply because it was inconvenient. Medical errors and conflicts needed evidence, not anger. But reviewers concluded that he had failed to use appropriate methods for a patient with aphasia and had not disclosed a material financial connection. His opinion was formally withdrawn from the guardianship case, and his clinic lost several institutional contracts that depended on public trust. Leonard's legal troubles took longer, as real legal troubles often did. Financial records had to be examined. Witnesses had to be interviewed. Lawyers argued over intent, disclosure rules, and the difference between poor judgment and criminal deception. But the investigation did not disappear. It grew. And the same careful documentation Leonard had believed he could control became the trail that followed him. Arthur did not return overnight to the man he had been before the stroke. Recovery was uneven. Some days, speaking remained exhausting. Some days, he grew angry at the patience his new life required. But the difference was that no one used those difficult days as permission to take away his choices. With Dr. Mercer's support, Arthur learned new communication tools. He began attending shortboard sessions remotely, reviewing materials in advance, and responding through a combination of typed notes, visual summaries, and scheduled breaks. The first time he voted against reopening negotiations with Horizon Vale, he did so slowly and unmistakably. The board secretary recorded the vote. No one called it confusion. He also made a decision that surprised many people. Instead of simply preserving the housing division under his personal control, Arthur transferred a significant share of it into a community benefit structure. Employees, tenant representatives, and an independent public interest board received defined oversight roles. The arrangement did not solve every problem. It did not turn a corporation into a perfect institution, but it made it harder for one ambitious executive to sell a mission built by thousands of people without answering to those people. Naomi refused the public attention that came afterward. Reporters tried to describe her as a hero, but she disliked the word. Heroes, she thought, were often used to make ordinary responsibilities sound extraordinary. She had only done what her work had taught her to do: preserve what mattered, ask what was missing, and refuse to let a person be erased because listening required effort. Arthur asked her to return to Ren Meridian, not as an assistant and not as a symbolic employee. He offered her the role of director of the newly expanded Lantern Archive and its companion advocacy program. The program would help families understand supported decision-making, protect older adults from financial exploitation, and teach organizations how to communicate with people whose disabilities made them easy to dismiss. Naomi accepted only after insisting on one condition. The program could not exist merely to polish the company's image. It had to serve people who had no connection to Ren Meridian and no ability to repay the help. Arthur agreed. A year later, the Lantern Center opened in a restored building near the old factory. Its walls held photographs of workers, copies of historical agreements, and shelves of records that many executives would once have called obsolete. There were meeting rooms for families, legal clinics staffed by volunteers, communication resources for stroke survivors, and a quiet reading room where Naomi kept Beatrice's brass paperweight beneath a glass case. Arthur attended the opening. He spoke only a few words, each one hard-earned. But he did not need many. The people in the room waited for him. That was the difference. Naomi stood near the archive room afterward and watched a young woman help her grandfather use a tablet to fill out a form. The older man took his time. No one reached for the device to answer in his place. No one called him confused because the silence lasted longer than expected. Naomi thought about the first morning in court when Leonard had tried to make her look like the problem. He had underestimated her because her work was quiet. He had underestimated Arthur because his speech was slow. He had underestimated records because he believed power belonged to whoever held the microphone. But truth did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waited in a sealed box. Sometimes it lived in a forgotten signature. Sometimes it survived because an ordinary person refused to throw away what others wanted erased. The lesson of Arthur Wren's case was not that every wealthy family hid a villain behind a polished smile. It wasn't that illness always revealed betrayal. The deeper lesson was that dignity depends on more than the ability to speak quickly, look powerful, or defend yourself in the language others expect. A person can be silent and still be certain. A person can be disabled and still deserve control over their own life. And whenever someone insists that another human being is too weak to be heard, we should ask who benefits from the silence. Because the most dangerous people are not always the ones who shout. Sometimes they are the ones who speak softly while reaching for someone else's voice. And sometimes all it takes to stop them is one person willing to preserve the truth until the moment the world is finally ready to listen. At Halston's charity gala, 15-year-old Noah Bennett was accused of stealing the library's most valuable book. They dragged him forward. Everyone watched in silence.
You were trusted here.
Conrad wanted a confession.
What did you think would happen?
Noah refused to lie.
I did not steal it.
The room believed Conrad.
Then explain why you were hiding it.
But Noah had found it.
I found it in a crate.
Because the original was missing.
The original never left this library.
Then Evelyn stepped forward.
Don't let them take that book.
She knew the truth. The displayed book was fake.
The book under glass is a forgery.
Conrad finally looked afraid.
Be careful what you accuse me of.
He did not steal history. He found what you buried.
To understand why, go back 6 weeks. 6 weeks earlier, the Halston Heritage Library had not yet become the center of a scandal. It was still only an old public building on the east side of the city, standing between a bus station and a row of stores that changed owners every few years. Its limestone walls were stained by decades of rain. Its copper roof had darkened almost black. In winter, the pipes groaned beneath the floorboards, and in summer, the upper reading room carried the warm scent of dust, cedar shelves, old paper and leather bindings that had survived longer than most of the people who once touched them. To wealthy people driving past in black cars, the library looked tired. It occupied valuable land near the river, close to luxury apartments, boutique hotels, and polished glass towers that had begun changing Halston beyond recognition. To developers, it was a property with potential. To city officials, it was a budget problem. To men like Conrad Vale, it was an opportunity waiting to be renamed. But to the people who used it every day, the library was something else entirely. Children came after school because it was quiet, safe, and warm. Older men came because they had nowhere else to sit after retirement. Mothers came to use the computers for job applications. Teenagers came to study, read, hide from arguments at home, or simply spend a few hours in a place where no one expected them to explain why life had become difficult. The library did not ask for proof of income. It did not care where a person slept. It did not demand that anyone explain their past before opening its doors. That was why Evelyn Hart had stayed there for so long. At 57, Evelyn had become the kind of woman people overlooked until they needed something only she could find. She was not loud. She did not dress to be noticed. Her gray-brown hair was always pinned neatly behind her head, and she wore thin cotton gloves whenever she handled old paper. Her clothes were simple, practical, and slightly old-fashioned. She moved through the archive rooms with careful, measured steps, as though every shelf held a memory that deserved respect. Officially, Evelyn was the library's senior archival assistant. It was a title that made her sound like someone who spent her days dusting books and filing records. In truth, she knew more about Halston's history than most of the men who gave speeches about it. She could identify a forged signature by the pressure of the ink. She could tell the age of a document by the fibers in its paper. She knew which streets had vanished beneath new construction, which neighborhoods had been renamed by investors, and which public promises had disappeared the moment money changed hands. Evelyn had built her life around those small traces, because 20 years earlier, she had learned what happened when powerful people believed they could erase them. Before coming to the library, Evelyn had been a forensic auditor for the city of Halston. She had worked in the municipal finance office, reviewing redevelopment budgets, public grants, housing contracts, and infrastructure programs. She had been good at her work. Too good, perhaps, for people who preferred financial reports to remain unread. At the time, Halston had been changing quickly. Old neighborhoods near the river were being cleared for redevelopment. Public housing projects were being repaired, relocated, or quietly abandoned. New foundations appeared every year, promising to rebuild struggling communities. Politicians praised private investment. Newspapers printed photographs of smiling developers standing beside ribbon cuttings and construction sites. One of those developers was Conrad Vale. Even then, Conrad had known how to make ambition sound like compassion. He was younger, hungrier, and far less famous than he would become, but the city already admired him. He spoke about restoring dignity to forgotten neighborhoods. He donated coats during winter drives. He appeared at school fundraisers. He made people feel that Halston's future depended on men like him. Evelyn had not disliked him at first. She had only followed the numbers. The more she reviewed the finances connected to the city's redevelopment programs, the more she noticed patterns that made no sense. Public funds intended for housing repairs were being transferred into charitable accounts. Those accounts paid consulting fees to private firms. The firms were connected to contractors. The contractors were connected to land purchases. The land purchases eventually led back to companies linked to Conrad Vale and his earliest business partners. Nothing had been stolen in one obvious act. That was what made the scheme so difficult to see. The money moved in fragments. It passed through foundations with hopeful names. It was hidden inside consulting contracts, administrative costs, redevelopment fees, and emergency transfers. Each transaction looked harmless by itself. But when Evelyn placed them beside one another, a pattern appeared. Public money was being used to help private interests control public land. Evelyn needed proof before she could report it. She needed someone who understood the city's old records, someone who knew where the original deeds and transfer documents had been stored. That person was Arthur Bennett. Arthur had been a municipal records clerk, quiet, patient, and almost invisible to the people who worked above him. He had no powerful friends. He had no political ambition. He was the kind of man who remembered the exact shelf where a file had been placed 15 years earlier, even after 3 office moves and 2 changes in the archive system. Arthur had recognized the same irregularities Evelyn had found. Several land transfer records had been altered. Dates had been changed. Property classifications had shifted after signatures were supposedly completed. Documents had appeared in folders where they did not belong. Some records carried seals that had not existed at the dates printed on them. Together, Evelyn and Arthur had come close to exposing the truth. Then the documents began disappearing. Before Evelyn could deliver her final report, she was accused of manipulating city financial records. The same spreadsheets she had used to uncover fraud were suddenly presented as evidence against her. Money that had vanished through a complicated network of transfers was blamed on her department. The city needed someone to absorb the scandal, and Evelyn was convenient. She was not wealthy. She was not politically connected. She had no family name that could frighten the people accusing her. Arthur tried to defend her. He submitted notes about altered deeds and missing evidence. He insisted that files had been removed from the archive system. But his warnings were dismissed as paranoia. He was removed from his job. His reputation was damaged. Within months, the city had painted Evelyn as a dishonest auditor, and Arthur as a troubled clerk, unable to accept the conclusions of the investigation. Conrad Vale survived untouched. In fact, he emerged stronger. Over the next 2 decades, his company grew. Vale Horizons built luxury towers, shopping centers, private hospitals, and waterfront districts. Conrad funded scholarships. He donated to museums. He sponsored youth programs. His name appeared on plaques across the city. And Evelyn disappeared. She took temporary work restoring documents. She cataloged private collections. She repaired damaged books. Eventually, the Halston Heritage Library hired her because old paper did not care what the newspapers had once said about her. The library was one of the few places where she could work without hearing whispers whenever she entered a room. For 20 years, Evelyn had not tried to fight her past. She had survived it. Then Conrad Vale announced that he wanted to save the library. The proposal arrived with headlines, television interviews, and photographs of Conrad standing beneath the library's stone archway, while promising a new future for Halston's children. Vale Horizons would invest $40 million into a modern educational complex called the Vale Center for Tomorrow. The plan included a technology wing, a media lab, a scholarship center, a renovated children's library, and a sleek glass structure extending toward the river. The city celebrated before most people read the details. The mayor praised Conrad's generosity. The library board called it a miracle. Newspapers described the project as a lifeline for an aging institution that could no longer survive on public funding alone. People who had never visited the library suddenly had opinions about how it should be transformed. But Evelyn saw what the others did not. The agreement required the city to lease the library property to Veil Horizons for 99 years. The library itself would remain open, at least in theory. But much of the surrounding land would be converted into private retail space, corporate offices, luxury cafes, and event halls. The old building would become the decorative center of a much larger commercial project. It would survive as an image, not as a promise. Evelyn understood the danger immediately. A public library did not belong to the city officials who happened to manage it. It belonged to the people who needed it. And once the land was given to a private company for nearly a century, there would be no easy way to take it back. She began studying the legal documents late at night. Most of the agreement had been carefully written by expensive lawyers. But near the end of the planning folder, hidden behind technical maps and development schedules, Evelyn found an amendment dated 1978. It claimed that the original terms of the library's founding agreement had been changed decades earlier, allowing the city to transfer the property for private development under certain conditions. At first glance, the document looked convincing. The language was formal. The seal appeared official. The pages were yellowed enough to suggest age. The signatures looked authentic. It was exactly the sort of paper most people accepted without question, because it looked old and complicated. But Evelyn had spent too long studying the small places where lies failed. The seal at the bottom of the amendment belonged to a municipal archive classification system created in 1986. The paper contained a fiber blend that had not been used in city documents during the 1970s. The typeface was correct for the era, but the spacing between lines matched a template introduced years later. The document claimed to have been filed in 1978, yet the reference number followed a code system that did not exist until the late 80s. Someone had created an old lie using new tools. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her small apartment on Grant Street, surrounded by copied documents and handwritten notes. Trucks rumbled below her window. The laundromat downstairs had closed hours earlier, leaving the building quiet except for the low hum of old machines. A mug of tea cooled beside her lamp as she compared the forged amendment to real city records. The more she studied it, the more certain she became. Someone was trying to steal the library without calling it theft. The next morning, Evelyn brought her findings to Martin Gage, the library director. Martin was not a bad man. He had spent years trying to keep the library open through funding cuts, staff reductions, and public indifference. He had the tired face of someone who had learned to celebrate every small victory because larger victories no longer seemed possible. Evelyn explained the inconsistencies. She showed him the mismatched archive seal. She pointed out the paper fibers, the date problem, and the wrong filing system. Martin listened. He looked uneasy. He turned the pages slowly. Then he told her that the city legal department had already approved the agreement. Conrad Vale's team had spent months preparing the proposal. The library board had accepted the documents as legitimate. Martin suggested that Evelyn might be viewing the situation through the pain of what had happened to her years earlier. He did not accuse her of lying. That would have been easier. Instead, he implied that her past had made her suspicious of everything. Evelyn left his office without arguing. Downstairs, in the reading room, Noah Bennett was sorting returned books onto a cart. He was 15, thin, dark-haired, and taller than people expected when they first saw him. His clothes were clean but worn. The sleeves of his jacket had frayed at the cuffs, and his shoes had been repaired with black tape near the soles. Noah had been coming to the library for nearly a year. He lived in a foster home on the other side of Halston, with a couple who were doing their best, but already had too many responsibilities. There were other children in the house, too many rules, and not enough quiet. Noah had moved through 4 placements in 6 years. He had learned not to unpack fully. He had learned not to ask whether a room was really his. He had learned that adults often said they wanted honesty, but only when honesty was easy to hear. At the library, no one asked him to explain himself. He volunteered after school. He organized donations, repaired loose book covers, helped older patrons use the computers, and spent hours reading local history. He liked maps, old newspapers, photographs, land records, and anything that revealed how the city had become what it was. He liked history, because history proved that people had existed even when the world tried to forget them. Evelyn had noticed him long before they became friends. At first, Noah had been another quiet boy sitting alone near the window. But then he began asking questions that surprised her. He wanted to know why old books sometimes had handwritten notes in the margins. He wanted to know why city maps showed streets that no longer existed. He wanted to know who decided what was worth preserving. One afternoon, Noah brought Evelyn a small brass key. It was heavy for its size, with a worn oval head and a symbol engraved near the shaft. The symbol looked like a lantern inside a circle. Noah explained that the key had belonged to his grandfather, Arthur Bennett. It was one of only 2 things Noah had left from him, along with an old photograph. When Evelyn looked at the photograph, the past reached out and took hold of her. Arthur Bennett stood beside a younger woman in an office filled with file boxes and folders. The woman wore a navy blouse and had dark hair pulled back from her face. She looked focused, determined, and far less tired than Evelyn remembered feeling during those years. The woman was Evelyn. For several seconds, she could not speak. Noah had never known the full story about his grandfather. He only knew that Arthur had worked for the city, had always spoken about truth, and had died before Noah was old enough to understand why adults avoided mentioning his name. Evelyn turned the brass key over in her gloved hand. The lantern symbol belonged to an old archival system. Before Halston digitized most sensitive records, certain files had been stored in locked cabinets beneath the library. The cabinet numbers were rarely listed in public records. Only longtime municipal employees knew they existed. That evening, after the public rooms closed, Evelyn took Noah down to the lower archive level. The basement corridor was narrow and cold. The lights hummed overhead. The stone walls carried the scent of damp paper and old dust. At the far end of the hallway stood several metal cabinets that had not been opened in years. Most were rusted. Some were sealed with outdated evidence labels. One cabinet bore the same lantern symbol as Noah's key, almost hidden beneath layers of paint. Noah placed the key in the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism turned. Inside, they found a cardboard box tied with brittle twine, several reels of microfilm, a packet of photographs, and a sealed envelope with Arthur Bennett's name written across the front in faded blue ink. Evelyn knew she should have contacted the city archives office immediately. She knew the rules. She knew the procedure. But when she saw Arthur's handwriting, she could not treat the moment like routine paperwork. The envelope contained a letter Arthur had written shortly before his death. It did not include a dramatic confession. It did not name every person involved. Arthur had been too careful for that. Instead, he wrote about fear. He wrote that the evidence they had found had been scattered, altered, and hidden in places no one would think to search. He wrote that Conrad Vale had never feared truth as much as he feared connections. A single document could be dismissed. A witness could be discredited. But if the old records were placed beside one another, they would reveal what had been done. Arthur believed the truth was still alive. It had simply been buried beneath the things powerful people considered worthless. At the bottom of the letter, he had left a sequence of dates, symbols, and file references. Evelyn recognized the system immediately. They were cross-references to municipal filings, redevelopment ledgers, library trust records, and financial documents connected to a charitable foundation that no longer officially existed. The name on the foundation was Vale Community Futures. It was one of Conrad Vale's first philanthropic organizations. Over the following days, Evelyn and Noah worked quietly. Noah helped copy reference codes, organize old files, and compare public records with the materials Arthur had left behind. He did not complain about the boring work. He had Arthur's patience in him, though he did not yet understand how deeply his grandfather had shaped him. Together, they found proof that the library land had never belonged to the city in the ordinary way. The property had been donated in 1912 by Margaret Halston, whose family had funded the original building. Her founding trust included a condition that had slowly disappeared from public summaries over the decades. The land had been given for permanent community use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into a private commercial project. If the city ever attempted to do so, ownership would automatically revert to an independent public trust established by Margaret Halston herself. The entire Vale Horizons project depended on that condition remaining hidden, and the condition was recorded inside the original Founders Register. The Founders Register was an enormous leather-bound ledger stored in the library's climate-controlled vault. It contained the names of the original trustees, the first donations, the land agreement, and Margaret Halston's handwritten founding conditions. 3 days after Evelyn and Noah discovered the clause, the library board announced that the Founders Register would be displayed as the centerpiece of the upcoming Halston Heritage Gala. The gala was being promoted as a celebration of the library's future. Conrad Vale would be honored as the man who had saved the building. Donors, politicians, reporters, and business leaders would gather beneath the stained glass ceiling. The original register would be placed under glass as a symbol of the library's history and its bright new beginning. Evelyn read the announcement twice. Then she went to the vault. The Founders Register was still on its shelf. At first, she almost felt relieved. The leather cover was the right color. The gold lettering appeared worn. The binding carried the same floral pattern. Everything looked exactly as it should. But Evelyn had handled the original register twice before in her career, and she remembered one small detail no copy could easily imitate. Near the lower corner of the true cover was a dark water stain left by the flood of 1947. The book in the vault had no stain. Evelyn stood perfectly still. Someone had already replaced the original. And somewhere inside Halston, Conrad Vale now had the one document that could destroy everything he was trying to build. Evelyn did not touch the false register again until she had taken photographs of every detail that proved it was a replacement. She photographed the smooth lower corner where the flood stain should have been. She photographed the stitching along the spine, too even and too clean for a book more than a century old. She photographed the pages under angled light, revealing fibers that did not match paper made in 1912. Then she went to Martin Gage one last time. This time she did not arrive with a theory. She arrived with evidence. Martin listened behind the closed door of his office, while Evelyn laid the photographs across his desk. Outside, the library remained busy. Children moved through the reading room. A printer hummed near the public computers. Someone laughed softly near the circulation counter. The ordinary sounds made the conversation feel even more unreal. Evelyn explained that the founder's register in the vault was not genuine. She explained that the true book contained the original land condition, preventing the library property from being leased for private development. She showed him the forged amendment from 1978 and the archive details that proved it had been created years later. Martin did not deny that the evidence looked troubling, but he was afraid of what the truth would cost. The gala was only days away. Conrad Vale's foundation had already paid for the event. City officials had confirmed their attendance. Newspapers had promised coverage. The library board had built its entire future around the announcement of the Vale Center for tomorrow. If Evelyn was right, the project would not merely be delayed, it could collapse completely. Martin told her that accusing Conrad Vale without official proof would be reckless. He warned that the board would see her actions as sabotage. He said that the city could not survive another public scandal involving the library. Evelyn understood what he was really saying. He believed the library needed Conrad more than it needed the truth. That afternoon, she was placed on administrative suspension. The letter was written in polite language. It claimed that she had accessed restricted material without authorization and caused unnecessary disruption during an important institutional transition. She was instructed not to enter the archive rooms until further notice. For the second time in her life, Evelyn watched a powerful system turn procedure into punishment. The first time, she had been younger. She had still believed that someone would eventually step in and ask what had truly happened. This time, she knew better. She did not argue. She gathered her gloves, her notebook, and the few personal items she kept in her archive drawer. Then she walked through the library without saying goodbye to anyone. Most of the staff avoided looking at her. A few looked sorry. None of them stopped her. That was the part Evelyn would remember most clearly. Not the suspension letter, not Martin's fear, not even the knowledge that Conrad Vale had found a way to rewrite history inside the very building meant to preserve it. What she remembered was how easy it had been for people to remain silent when silence protected them. Noah learned about Evelyn's suspension the following day. He had arrived after school carrying a stack of returned books, unaware that he was no longer supposed to be there. The circulation desk employee told him quietly that his volunteer access had been paused. She would not explain why. At first, Noah thought it was because of Evelyn. Then the security supervisor approached him with a rare 19th century atlas in his hands. The atlas had been found beneath the table where Noah usually studied. It was one of the most valuable items in the special collection. Its pages were delicate, its maps hand-colored, and its cover embossed with the seal of the old Halston Survey Office. It should never have been left in the public reading room. Yet there it was, beneath Noah's chair, as though someone had placed it there specifically to be discovered. Noah said he had never touched it. The supervisor did not accuse him directly. He did something more damaging. He made it clear that the library could no longer trust him around valuable materials. Noah stood in the lobby holding the volunteer badge he had worn for almost a year. Around him, people continued walking past the front desk. Some glanced at him. Most did not. He knew what they saw. A foster kid with worn shoes. A quiet boy without parents beside him. Someone easy to blame because people already believed he probably had a reason to take what did not belong to him. By the end of the day, Noah had been barred from volunteering. He did not tell Evelyn immediately. He waited until evening. then went to her apartment on Grant Street, carrying the suspension letter from the library and the brass key that had belonged to Arthur Bennett. Rain had soaked the shoulders of his jacket. His hair clung to his forehead. He tried to act as though the letter did not matter, but Evelyn saw the way he held it. The library had been one of the only places where Noah had felt wanted without being examined. It had been a place where he could sit beside other people without worrying about whether they knew his history. A place where he could be useful. A place where his questions were welcomed. Now it had become another door closing in his face. Evelyn wanted to tell him that none of this was his fault, but she knew those words would not be enough. Instead, she showed him the evidence she had copied before leaving the archive. The photographs of the fake register, the forged 1978 amendment, Arthur's letter, the notes about the hidden land condition. She told him that the people responsible wanted both of them out of the way because they were getting too close. Noah listened without interrupting. Then he asked the question Evelyn had been trying not to ask herself. If Conrad Vale had taken the real register, where had he put it? The answer came the following morning. Noah had gone behind the library to throw away a bag of old newspapers for his foster mother. Near the recycling bins, he noticed several boxes from Vale Community Futures stacked beside the loading dock. Most were empty packaging from gala decorations, but one crumpled sheet of paper had blown loose from the top of a bin. It was a delivery manifest. The document listed several crates scheduled to arrive before the Halston Heritage Gala. One crate was marked as historical display material. Another carried a more private label, archival handling, restricted access. At the bottom of the page was a reference code. Noah did not recognize it. But when he brought the manifest to Evelyn, she went pale. The code matched one of the references Arthur Bennett had written beneath his letter. It was not a random number. It was an old city archive designation used for sensitive materials moved without public cataloging. The true Founders Register had not been destroyed. It was being transported, and Conrad Vale was planning to bring it into the library on the night of the gala. At first, Evelyn wanted Noah to stay away. She had already seen what Conrad's people were willing to do. They had planted the Atlas. They had turned the library staff against him. They had made him look suspicious before he had done anything wrong. But Noah had spent too much of his life being told to sit quietly while adults made choices that changed everything around him. He did not want to be reckless. He did not want revenge. He only wanted to stop someone from erasing the truth the way Arthur Bennett's truth had been erased. Evelyn understood that feeling better than anyone, so they made a plan. Evelyn would attend the gala even though she had not been invited. She would remain near the public entrance, where the press and city officials would be gathered. Noah would not confront Conrad. He would only look for the delivery crate and confirm whether the original register was inside. If he found it, he would not touch it. He would send Evelyn a message. The plan sounded simple, but nothing involving Conrad Vale had ever been simple. On the night of the gala, the Halston Heritage Library no longer looked like itself. The children's tables had been removed. The public computers were covered in black cloth. White flowers stood in silver vases beneath the marble staircase. A long carpet stretched through the main reading room, where students usually sat with notebooks and tired parents usually searched for work online. The library had become a ballroom. Guests in tuxedos and gowns arrived beneath strings of warm lights. City officials posed for photographs. Donors drank champagne beneath the stained glass ceiling. A small orchestra played near the old reference desk. At the center of the room, beneath a narrow beam of light, the fake Founders Register rested inside a glass display case. Conrad Vale stood nearby in a black dinner jacket, wearing a silver pin shaped like an open book. He smiled for cameras. He greeted politicians by name. He spoke about education, opportunity, and the future of Halston, with the ease of a man who had spent his life learning how to make people believe that wealth and goodness were the same thing. The guests loved him. They saw the billionaire who had promised $40 million. They saw the philanthropist who wanted to save an old library. They saw the man who had built towers, schools, foundations, and a reputation so polished that few people remembered what might be hidden beneath it. They did not see the forged amendment. They did not see the stolen register. They did not see the evidence Arthur Bennett had hidden 20 years earlier. Noah entered through the service corridor shortly before the main speech began. He wore a borrowed Navy suit that was slightly too large at the shoulders. The sleeves were long. The shoes hurt his feet. His tie was not perfectly straight. He looked like a boy trying to belong in a room built for people who had never been told that they did not. Near the loading area, behind temporary catering stations and stacks of wine boxes, Noah found the crate marked for private archival handling. The Vale Community Futures logo was stamped across the side. His heart began to race. The crate had been placed behind a curtain beside flower supplies and event equipment. It was not locked. That seemed wrong to Noah. Something so important should have been guarded. But perhaps Conrad had believed no one would ever look there. Noah carefully lifted the lid. Inside, beneath layers of foam and packing paper, was the original Founder's Register. He recognized it instantly. The leather cover bore the dark water stain near the lower corner. The binding looked older, heavier, and more fragile than the polished imitation displayed beneath the ballroom lights. For a moment, Noah could only stare. He thought of Arthur Bennett. He thought of Evelyn. He thought of the atlas planted beneath his table. He thought of every time someone had looked at his foster care file before they looked at his face. Then he made the decision that would change everything. He lifted the register from the crate. He intended to carry it only far enough to show Evelyn. He never made it out of the corridor. 2 security guards appeared before he reached the service door. They moved too quickly. They did not ask why he had the register. They did not ask how he found it. They did not seem surprised at all. They took the book from his hands and led him toward the ballroom. At that exact moment, the orchestra began to fade. And beneath the stained glass ceiling, surrounded by donors, politicians, and cameras, Conrad Vale was preparing to tell the city what kind of future he believed it deserved. When the security guards escorted Noah Bennett into the ballroom, the orchestra had just fallen silent. The sound disappeared so suddenly that the room seemed to hold its breath. Hundreds of guests turned toward the boy in the borrowed Navy suit. Under the stained glass ceiling of the Halston Heritage Library, Noah looked smaller than he had only minutes earlier. His hands were empty now. The old Founder's Register had been taken from him and held by one of the guards as though it were proof of a crime. Conrad Vale stood near the center of the room, surrounded by donors, city officials, cameras, and people who had spent the evening praising his generosity. He did not rush forward. He did not raise his voice. He understood that real power rarely needed to shout. Instead, he looked at Noah with carefully measured disappointment. To the guests, it seemed obvious what had happened. A foster boy had been found in a private service corridor, carrying the most valuable historical document in the library. The evidence looked simple. The story felt complete. And because Noah was young, poor, unknown, and already viewed with suspicion by people who had never bothered to know him, most of the room had decided he was guilty before anyone asked a single question. No one asked why a frightened 15-year-old would steal a book he could not sell. No one asked why security found him so quickly. No one asked why the original register had been stored inside a crate belonging to Conrad Vale's own foundation. They only saw what Conrad wanted them to see. The billionaire spoke to the room with a sadness that sounded almost compassionate. He described Noah as a young person who had been given an opportunity by the library, by the community, and by the very people gathered there that evening. He made it seem as though Noah had betrayed kindness. He made the guests feel sorrow for him, while quietly convincing them that he could not be trusted. It was a performance Conrad had perfected over decades. He knew how to make cruelty look like concern. Noah stood still beneath the stained glass ceiling, his face pale and his shoulders tense. He had spent years learning that when adults had already made up their minds, speaking too much could make things worse. So he said nothing. He only looked toward the rear entrance of the ballroom. That was when Evelyn Hart stepped into the room. She was not dressed like the other guests. She wore a simple dark coat over a plain dress. Her gray-brown hair was pinned neatly behind her head, and beneath one arm she carried the leather portfolio containing every piece of evidence she had managed to collect before Conrad's people pushed her out of the library. For a moment, no one noticed her. Then Conrad Vale did. His expression changed only slightly. It was small enough that most people missed it. But Evelyn saw the shift in his eyes. For the first time that night, the man who had controlled every detail of the gala looked uncertain. Evelyn walked past the donors, the board members, the city officials, and the photographers. She moved without hurry, but she did not hesitate. She had spent 20 years avoiding rooms like this one. 20 years allowing people to remember her as the woman who had supposedly betrayed the city. 20 years carrying the knowledge that the truth had been buried because no one important wanted to hear it. But this was no longer only about her. It was about Noah. It was about Arthur Bennett. It was about a library that had been built for people who had nowhere else to go. Evelyn stopped beside Noah and looked directly at the founder's register in the guard's hands. Then she looked toward the glass display case in the center of the ballroom. Inside the case, beneath a narrow beam of warm light, rested another version of the founder's register. The guests did not understand what they were seeing. Two old leather books could look nearly identical from a distance, but Evelyn did not need to touch them to know which one was real. The register beneath the glass was the forgery. The book Noah had found was the original. Evelyn told the room that Noah had not stolen anything. The real founder's register had been removed from the library vault and replaced with a false copy. Noah had found the original book hidden inside a crate, marked for private archival handling, a crate delivered by Vale Community Futures. A ripple moved through the crowd. Conrad responded calmly. He suggested that Evelyn was making another accusation without proof. He reminded the guests, in careful and indirect language, that she had once been involved in a financial scandal with the city. He wanted the room to remember her as a disgraced former auditor, not as the woman standing before them with evidence. It was the same weapon he had used 20 years earlier. But Evelyn had not come unprepared. She opened her portfolio and placed several photographs on a nearby table. The first showed the original register's old water stain, the dark mark near the lower corner of the leather cover caused by the Halston flood of 1947. The second showed the book currently displayed beneath the glass, smooth and spotless in the exact place where the stain should have been. The third showed the forged 1978 amendment that had supposedly allowed the library land to be leased to Vale Horizons. Then Evelyn began explaining the details, The register in the display case had been made with modern leather. Its gold edges had been chemically aged. Its thread stitching was too regular, too clean, and too new. The paper inside carried a watermark from a mill that did not exist in 1912. The pages had been machine-trimmed, while the original book's pages were uneven because they had been cut by hand. To many people in the room, those differences seemed small. But small details were often where lies failed. Evelyn pointed toward the register Noah had found. The true book carried the old flood stain. Its leather had darkened naturally over more than a century. Its binding was heavier. Its paper showed the irregular fibers of handmade archival stock. Every mark on it told the story of time. The forgery only told the story of someone trying to erase that time. A woman near the front stepped forward. Her name was Dr. Maya Collins, a historical preservation professor from Halston University. Conrad had invited her to the gala because he expected her to praise the renovation project and speak about the importance of preserving the library's heritage. Instead, she examined Evelyn's photographs, then looked carefully at the book beneath the glass, and finally turned toward the register held by security. Her expression tightened. She confirmed that Evelyn was correct. The book in the display case was not the original founder's register. It was a reproduction. The ballroom changed in an instant. Until that moment, Conrad Vale had controlled the story. He had been the benefactor. Noah had been the thief. Evelyn had been the bitter former employee trying to ruin a charitable evening. But now, with one expert confirmation, the entire room had to consider another possibility. What if the boy had been telling the truth? What if the woman they had dismissed was right? What if the man they had spent years admiring was hiding something far worse than a forged book? Conrad tried to regain control. He suggested that the reproduction might have been created for preservation purposes. He implied that his foundation had simply handled the materials incorrectly. He said the original register may have been moved without his knowledge. But Evelyn placed the delivery manifest beside the photographs. It showed the private archival crate scheduled through Vale Community Futures. The reference number matched one of Arthur Bennett's old archival codes. Then Evelyn revealed the photograph Noah had found online, taken earlier that evening by a catering employee. In the background, clearly visible behind the flower arrangements, was the crate being moved into the loading area by a Vale Community Futures staff member. The register had not been misplaced. It had been hidden. And it had been hidden by people connected directly to Conrad Vale. Noah finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room because no one else moved. He explained that he had found the real register inside the crate. He said he had recognized the water stain because Evelyn had described it to him. He did not claim to understand every detail. He did not try to sound brave. He simply told the truth. And because he did not ask for sympathy, the truth sounded stronger. For the first time that night, the guests looked at Noah differently. They no longer saw a foster boy caught with stolen property. They saw a child who had been placed at the center of a lie. Evelyn asked the guard to place the real founder's register on the table. Dr. Collins put on archival gloves. Evelyn did the same. Together, they opened the heavy leather cover. The first pages contained the names of the original trustees, the handwritten donations that funded the building, and the founding records of the library. The ink had faded from black to brown, but it was still readable. The pages were delicate, but they carried the weight of a century. Then Evelyn turned to the section that mattered most. There, in Margaret Halston's original handwriting, was the condition that Conrad Vale had tried to erase. The land beneath the library had been donated for permanent public use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into private commercial property. If the city ever attempted to use the land for private development, ownership would automatically revert to the Holston Community Trust. The Vale Center for Tomorrow had been built on an illegal promise. The 99-year lease Conrad planned to use was invalid. His $40 million donation had never been a rescue plan. It had been the first step in taking control of land that did not belong to him. The room became quieter than before. Somewhere near the back, a glass touched the floor and shattered. But the biggest revelation had not yet arrived. Evelyn had spent days studying Arthur Bennett's letter. She had understood that his codes were more than references to missing files. They were instructions. Arthur had hidden something inside the one object Conrad would never dare destroy openly. Near the back cover of the Founder's Register, beneath a narrow strip of worn leather, Evelyn found an old stitched seam. It had been repaired after the flood decades earlier. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary restoration work. But Arthur had known the library well. He had known that old repairs were often ignored because people assumed they had no importance. He had trusted that one day, someone would understand the clue he had left behind. Evelyn carefully loosened the seam. Inside the spine of the register was a folded packet wrapped in wax paper. The packet had been hidden there for 20 years. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things. The first was a notarized statement written by Arthur Bennett. In it, he described how he and Evelyn had uncovered altered land records, falsified redevelopment contracts, and diverted public funds linked to Conrad Vale's earliest business operations. The second was a duplicate ledger containing transaction codes that matched the irregularities Evelyn had discovered before the city accused her of fraud. The third was a list of account numbers, shell companies, transfer dates, and financial references connecting Vale Community Futures to the same network of accounts that had existed 20 years earlier under different names. The past had not disappeared. Arthur had preserved it. He had hidden it inside the very book Conrad had tried to replace with a beautiful lie. Conrad reached toward the table. It was only a small movement, but everyone saw it. Until that moment, he had remained composed. Men like Conrad Vale did not collapse the way ordinary people imagined. They had spent too many years practicing dignity in public. But when he saw Arthur's statement in Evelyn's hands, the color left his face. He knew exactly what the documents meant. The forged amendment connected to the false register. The false register connected to the illegal lease. The lease connected to Vale Horizons. The ledger connected to the redevelopment fraud from 20 years earlier. And the old case against Evelyn Hart was no longer a forgotten scandal. It was evidence. The ballroom did not erupt at once. At first, people simply stared. The mayor stepped away from Conrad. The library board chair lowered her glass. Reporters began moving closer, their phones raised, their cameras recording. Dr. Collins continued examining the documents. Her silence carried more weight than any dramatic announcement. Then someone from the city attorney's office stepped forward and requested that the Founder's Register, Arthur's statement, the ledger, and all related transfer documents be secured immediately. The gala was suspended. The auction never began. Conrad tried to speak privately with the board members, but privacy had disappeared from the room. The donors who had praised him all evening were suddenly eager to distance themselves. The officials who supported the lease began insisting that they had trusted the legal review process. The people who had benefited from Conrad's power discovered that they had never really known him. That was not entirely true. Some of them had known enough. They had simply decided that knowing was less important than staying close to him. Noah was released from security custody before the police even arrived. The guards apologized in the stiff, uncomfortable way people apologized when they realized they had treated a child like a criminal because it was easier than questioning a wealthy man. Noah did not say much. His hands were still shaking. Evelyn stood beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Noah looked at the old photograph Evelyn had brought in her portfolio. Arthur Bennett stood beside the younger version of Evelyn, both of them surrounded by file boxes and records that no one had wanted to believe. For the first time, Noah understood that his grandfather had not died as a forgotten man. Arthur had spent his final years protecting the truth for people he would never live long enough to meet. And Evelyn understood something too. Arthur had trusted the future more than he had trusted the present. He had hidden the evidence because he believed that someday, someone would be brave enough to find it. The first headlines appeared before midnight. By morning, Halston was no longer talking about Conrad Vale's donation. It was talking about forged documents, hidden ledgers, a stolen historical register, and a foster boy who had been accused of theft while holding the evidence that could expose one of the city's most powerful men. The investigation did not end in a single night. Real justice rarely does. For weeks, state auditors examined records connected to Vale Horizons, Vale Community Futures, and several companies that had been created and dissolved over the past 2 decades. Investigators reopened the case against Evelyn Hart. Former city employees were interviewed. Some had been too afraid to speak years earlier. Some had seen files disappear. Some had been pressured to revise dates, remove pages, or approve financial transfers they did not understand. One former accountant described being told that certain payments should never be questioned because Conrad Vale had influential friends. Another employee from Vale Community Futures provided internal emails showing that the original founder's register had been moved without library authorization. A retired clerk confirmed that Arthur Bennett had warned the city about altered deeds long before he was dismissed. The deeper investigators looked, the more they found. Conrad Vale had not built his entire empire through fraud. That was what made the truth even more disturbing. His businesses had been large enough, successful enough, and respectable enough on the surface to hide the parts that were not. He had used real projects, real donations, and real public goodwill as cover for a pattern of manipulation that had begun long before most people at the gala knew his name. The library lease was canceled. The city was forced to acknowledge that the land could not be transferred for private benefit. The Halston Community Trust took legal control of the property under Margaret Halston's original founding condition. The old building would remain public. Conrad's commercial development plan was abandoned. His foundation board removed him from leadership. Major donors withdrew support. Politicians who had once praised him began claiming they had been deceived. His company lost contracts. His reputation, built carefully over decades, began to collapse under the weight of documents he had assumed no one would ever find. Months later, Conrad Vale was charged with document forgery, financial fraud, obstruction of a public investigation, conspiracy to manipulate municipal records, and the false accusation of a minor. He was not destroyed because someone shouted louder than he did. He was destroyed because the records he had ignored finally spoke louder than his reputation. That was the poetic justice of it. Conrad had spent his life believing that buildings were valuable only when they could be turned into profit. He had looked at the library and seen land waiting to be claimed. He had looked at old documents and seen clutter. He had looked at Evelyn Hart and seen a woman whose name could be buried. He had looked at Noah Bennett and seen a boy nobody would defend. But in the end, The old library became the place where his lies were exposed. The papers he considered useless became the evidence that ended his control. The woman he thought he had ruined became the person who restored the truth. And the boy he called a thief became the reason the truth survived long enough to be found. Evelyn's exoneration came quietly. There was no parade, no grand television special, no famous speaker standing beneath the stained glass ceiling. Instead, the city attorney's office released a formal statement confirming that the case against her had been built on manipulated evidence and incomplete records. Her name was cleared. Her professional license was restored. The city issued an apology that was far too brief for 20 years of damage. But it was more than Evelyn had once believed she would ever receive. Martin Gage visited her several weeks later. He looked older than he had before the gala. He admitted that he had failed her. He had wanted to protect the library, but in doing so, he had protected the people trying to take it away. He had confused caution with integrity. Evelyn did not forgive him easily. She did not need to. Forgiveness was not pretending that nothing had happened. She made him understand that institutions were not saved by avoiding conflict. They were saved by refusing to abandon the people who tried to protect them. Martin stepped down as library director at the end of the year. The Halston Community Trust asked Evelyn to return as director of public archives and historical preservation. At first, she hesitated. The title felt too large. The office felt too close to the life she had once lost. But Noah reminded her that the library had never needed someone who looked important. It needed someone who understood what was worth protecting. So Evelyn accepted. The first project she approved was the restoration of the lower archive wing. The second was the creation of the Arthur Bennett Reading Room. It was not a grand hall with marble plaques and expensive furniture. It was a warm, bright room on the first floor where children could read, study, use computers, ask for help with schoolwork, and learn how to search public records. A framed photograph of Arthur Bennett hung near the entrance beside a small brass plaque describing him as a city records clerk who had protected the truth when few others would. Noah attended the opening ceremony in a suit that actually fit. He did not become a millionaire. He did not suddenly inherit a mansion or receive some impossible reward that solved every problem in his life. His foster care situation did not magically become easy. There were still forms, meetings, uncertainty, and memories that could not disappear because one wealthy man had finally been exposed. But Noah was no longer alone. The library hired him as a paid youth archive assistant. He learned how to preserve paper, repair damaged bindings, search municipal databases, and trace the history of buildings that other people passed without noticing. He began taking evening classes through a local college program. For the first time, he had adults who did not see him as a file number or a problem waiting to happen. He had a place where his curiosity was not treated like trouble. He had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding whether he deserved one. Nearly a year after the gala, Noah returned to the lower archive room where Arthur's letter had been found. Evelyn was there, sorting a box of newly cataloged documents. The old brass key rested in Noah's palm. For a long time, he looked at it without speaking. Then he placed it inside a small display case beside Arthur's photograph. The key had once represented a locked past. It had been the only thing Noah carried from a grandfather he barely remembered. But now it meant something different. It was no longer a reminder of what had been hidden. It was proof that some doors stayed closed only until the right person found the courage to open them. The Halston Heritage Library remained standing. The roof was repaired, but not with Conrad's money. Community groups raised funds. Former students returned to donate. Local businesses contributed without demanding that their names be carved into stone. The city restored public support after learning, through humiliation, that libraries were not private charities for the wealthy to rescue. They were public promises. And every day, people continued coming through the library's doors. Children came to read. Parents came to fill out job applications. Older patrons came to sit by the windows. Teenagers came to study or hide from the rain. Most of them never knew every detail of the scandal that had saved the building. They did not need to. The lights were on. The shelves were full. The doors remained open to anyone. That was enough. But Evelyn never forgot the lesson hidden inside Arthur Bennett's letter. Truth does not disappear because it is weak. Sometimes it disappears because powerful people train everyone else to look away. They make doubt feel embarrassing. They make questions feel dangerous. They make ordinary people believe that wealth, confidence, and public applause are the same thing as goodness. But they are not. And in the end, it took a quiet archivist, a foster boy everyone was ready to blame, and a book full of forgotten pages to remind an entire city that dignity does not belong only to those who can afford to defend themselves. Sometimes the people treated as invisible are the only ones still paying attention. Sometimes the things everyone calls old are the only witnesses that never lie. And sometimes justice begins the moment one person decides that silence has lasted long enough. If you believe that truth deserves to be protected, even when powerful people try to bury it, share this story and tell us what you would have done if you had been in that room.
Step away from that Ferrari before I make this worse for you.
Malcolm Reed did not move an inch.
You already made it worse when you decided I could not own it.
His appearance told Vanessa everything she assumed.
A man like you does not arrive here in a car like that.
But Malcolm gave her one quiet warning.
Be very careful with the story you are about to tell.
Vanessa turned suspicion into a public accusation.
Someone call security! This man is trying to steal from my company!
The valet knew the truth was nearby.
Ma'am, I think you should look at the registration first.
Vanessa made sure he could not speak.
One more word, and you will lose this job tonight.
Malcolm protected him without raising his voice.
Do not punish him for telling the truth.
The truth is obvious. He does not belong beside a Ferrari.
The crowd watched Vanessa judge him openly. Still, Malcolm never looked afraid. Then police lights washed over the Ferrari.
Sir, keep your hands where I can see them. Before you touch me, you may want to call your superiors.
But Malcolm's silence had a history. To understand why Malcolm Reed stood there so still while a woman tried to turn his life into a crime scene, you have to understand that he had survived far worse than being underestimated. He had built his entire life in rooms where people looked at him last, listened to him least, and then acted surprised when his ideas saved them. Malcolm had been born in a neighborhood where broken engines were more common than working streetlights, and where boys learned early that the world often noticed their mistakes faster than their talent. His father had driven buses for nearly 30 years. His mother cleaned offices and buildings where the executives never learned her name. But in their small garage behind the house, Malcolm found a language that did not care about status. Engines either worked or they did not. Metal either fit or it failed. A machine could be understood if a person had patience, discipline, and the humility to listen. As a child, Malcolm could not afford model cars, so he drew them. He sketched the curves of Italian sports cars from old magazines other people threw away. He studied the way light moved across the hood of a Ferrari, the way every line seemed to be a decision made by someone who understood speed as both science and poetry. But he did not love cars because they were expensive. He loved them because they were proof that imagination could become something real enough to touch. While other boys dreamed of owning a Ferrari, Malcolm dreamed of understanding why one existed at all. He wanted to know how beauty and engineering could meet in one object so perfectly that even a stranger on the sidewalk would stop breathing for half a second. That obsession carried him out of the neighborhood, through scholarships, late-night jobs, and years of being the only person in the room who looked like him. He became an engineer first, then a designer, then a businessman almost by accident. People who understood cars trusted him. People who understood numbers eventually had no choice but to respect him. But Malcolm never chased attention. Attention to him was a noisy room where people applauded before they understood the cost of what they were praising. He preferred quiet ownership. He preferred to build things and let others stand beneath the lights. It was a habit born partly from humility and partly from pain. The person who understood that pain best was his wife, Eleanor Reed. Eleanor had met Malcolm before anyone called him brilliant, before investors returned his calls, before his first company appeared in financial magazines. She had met him when he still carried engine grease under his fingernails and apology in his posture, as though the world had taught him to take up less space than he deserved. Eleanor never saw him that way. She saw the mind behind the quiet. She saw the patience behind the restraint. She saw a man who could walk past a showroom window and describe, from memory, how the car inside breathed. For years, Malcolm and Eleanor built a life that looked ordinary from the outside and extraordinary from within. She taught high school literature. He worked impossible hours in the automotive industry, first repairing what others broke, then designing systems that made luxury dealerships more efficient, more honest, and more profitable. He believed the car business did not have to be built on arrogance. He believed that people buying a dream should not be cheated by those selling it. Eleanor believed in him so completely that when he hesitated to start his own company, she placed a notebook on the kitchen table and filled the first page with the name she thought belonged to his future. Reed Caldwell Automotive Group. Caldwell was not Malcolm's name. It belonged to Richard Caldwell, a charming investor with old money, perfect teeth, and the kind of confidence that opened doors before he knocked. Richard had the connections Malcolm lacked. Malcolm had the vision Richard could never have invented. Together, they launched what would eventually become Caldwell Prestige Motors, a chain of high-end dealerships known for rare European cars, white glove service, and a reputation so polished that wealthy customers trusted it before reading the contracts. In the early days, Malcolm believed partnership meant shared purpose. He learned later that some people use partnership as a polite word for taking what another person built. Richard Caldwell liked Malcolm's mind, but he did not like Malcolm's presence at the front of the company. Investors, Richard warned, were more comfortable with a familiar face. Clients, he suggested, expected a certain image. Malcolm heard the meaning beneath every careful phrase. He had heard it his whole life. So he stayed behind the curtain and built the systems, trained the staff, negotiated the supplier relationships, and designed the customer ethics policy that became the company's hidden strength. Richard smiled at ribbon cuttings. Malcolm made sure the lights stayed on. Then came the betrayal. It was not dramatic at first. Betrayal rarely announces itself with thunder. It arrives as missing paperwork, delayed signatures, board meetings rescheduled without notice, legal language no one explains until it is too late. By the time Malcolm realized Richard had tried to push him out, the company was already wearing another man's name like a stolen suit. Eleanor wanted him to fight publicly. She wanted the world to know who had built the foundation beneath Caldwell's marble floors. Malcolm wanted justice too, but he also knew the cost of a public battle. He had seen what powerful men could do when they felt exposed. He chose a slower kind of justice, one that required patience, discipline, and the kind of silence most people mistake for surrender. With Eleanor's help, Malcolm protected what mattered. Through a private family trust, carefully structured before Richard understood what was happening, Malcolm retained controlling interest in the holding company behind Caldwell Prestige Motors. Richard kept the spotlight. Malcolm kept the keys. The arrangement was strange, but it worked. Malcolm stepped away from the public face of the company and built a private investment firm that quietly rescued businesses, funded scholarships, and supported young mechanics who reminded him of the boy he used to be. Richard Caldwell enjoyed fame until illness and debt consumed the last years of his life. After his death, the Caldwell name remained, but the real power never sat where outsiders thought it did. Eleanor was the only person who knew how much that silence had cost him. She knew that every time Malcolm entered one of his own dealerships and watched employees fail to recognize him, a small part of him had to choose peace over pride. She also knew he was not weak. He was waiting. Not waiting for revenge exactly, but for the right moment to turn ownership into protection. She used to tell him that wealth was only meaningful when it defended people who had none. Malcolm carried those words long after Eleanor became ill, long after hospital rooms replaced business meetings, long after the woman who had believed in him before the world did left him with more money than he wanted, and one promise he could not forget. The Ferrari came from that promise. Years before Eleanor died, she and Malcolm had walked past a private collection after a charity dinner. Inside, under warm museum lights, was a deep red Ferrari, 812 super fast, elegant and aggressive, a machine that seemed to be moving even while parked. Eleanor had smiled at the way Malcolm stopped talking mid-sentence. She had known he was not seeing status. He was seeing childhood, survival, and design brought together in one impossible shape. She had told him that one day, when he finally stopped hiding from the life he had earned, he should buy one in red, not because rich men did, but because the boy in the garage deserved to see his dream in color. Malcolm did not buy it while she was alive. During her illness, extravagance felt obscene. After her funeral, it felt empty. But on the first anniversary of her passing, he purchased the Ferrari through the Eleanor Reed Memorial Trust, not as a trophy, but as a memorial. He had her initials engraved inside the cabin, where only someone looking closely would notice. He drove it rarely, and only on days connected to purpose. The car was not a toy. It was a reminder that grief could travel with beauty, and that promises made in love did not expire when a heartbeat stopped. The night of the Meridian Auto Museum Gala was one of those days. Caldwell Prestige Motors was sponsoring the event, at least publicly, but the real money came from the Eleanor Reed Memorial Trust. The gala was meant to launch a scholarship program for underprivileged students entering automotive engineering and technical training. Malcolm had insisted the program focus not on polished applicants with perfect resumes, but on young people who had learned from broken engines, family sacrifice, and necessity. He wanted the scholarship to find the version of himself the world had nearly missed. Vanessa Caldwell had other priorities. She was not Richard Caldwell's daughter, though she allowed people to assume the connection when it helped her. She had married briefly into the extended Caldwell family, kept the name after the divorce, and built a career out of appearing indispensable to men who confused Polish with competence. Vanessa had been appointed interim CEO after a leadership scandal shook the company, and she treated the temporary position as though it were a throne. She understood luxury branding, media optics, and the social choreography of wealthy rooms. She did not understand loyalty. She did not understand craftsmanship. And she certainly did not understand the kind of quiet power that did not need to introduce itself. To Vanessa, Caldwell Prestige Motors was an image to be sold. She wanted to merge the company with a foreign luxury conglomerate that had no interest in Malcolm's ethics policies, scholarship commitments, or employee protections. The sale would have given Vanessa an enormous personal bonus and a permanent title in the new organization. It also would have gutted the foundation Malcolm had built. Customer service departments would be outsourced. Longtime mechanics would be dismissed. The scholarship fund would be renamed, reduced, and folded into a marketing campaign. Vanessa called it modernization. Malcolm saw it for what it was: extraction disguised as progress. For months, Malcolm had watched from a distance as reports crossed his desk. Customer complaints rose. Employees resigned. Warranty claims were delayed to improve quarterly numbers. A small transfer from the charity budget had been labeled as event preparation, then moved again through consulting fees. No single entry proved corruption by itself, but together they created a pattern. Malcolm had seen enough patterns in his life to know when a machine was beginning to fail. He did not rush. He asked his legal team to gather documents. He asked the board chair to observe quietly. And then he accepted the invitation to attend the Meridian Gala in person. He did not tell Vanessa he was coming. He did not ask for a reserved entrance. He did not request a security escort or a press announcement. He drove himself in the Ferrari because Eleanor would have laughed at the idea of him arriving in a chauffeured sedan to a scholarship created in her name. He wore a simple navy jacket, a white shirt, and the watch Eleanor had given him when their first company turned a profit. The watch was not flashy. Its value was sentimental, not obvious. That was how Malcolm preferred most things. At the museum, the evening was already glittering when he arrived. The building curved in glass and steel around a central hall filled with historic race cars, polished engines, and photographs of drivers who had risked everything for speed. Wealth moved through the room with practiced ease. Champagne glasses caught the light. Sponsors smiled for cameras. Young scholarship applicants stood near the edges, dressed in borrowed suits and careful dresses, trying not to look overwhelmed by a world that had rarely opened doors for them. Malcolm noticed them first. He always noticed the people standing at the edges. One of those young people was Jordan Ellis, a valet assigned to the front entrance for the evening. Jordan was 22, nervous, and trying hard to appear invisible. 3 years earlier, he had been one bad month away from dropping out of a technical training program when an anonymous grant paid his tuition balance. He never learned the donor's name, only that the grant came from a trust connected to automotive education. What Jordan did not know yet was that the man stepping out of the red Ferrari was the reason he had a uniform, a job, and a future still within reach. Jordan recognized the car before he recognized the man. Everyone did. The Ferrari seemed to gather attention as naturally as fire gathers heat. Malcolm handed over no performance, no boast, no demand for special treatment. He simply greeted Jordan with respect, asked whether the staff had been given a place to eat during the long event, and waited for the answer with the seriousness of someone who considered that question important. Jordan was so startled by the courtesy that it took him a moment to respond. Most guests treated valet workers as extensions of the curb. Malcolm treated him as a person whose comfort mattered. That small exchange might have passed unnoticed if Vanessa Caldwell had not been standing near the entrance, preparing for a photographer. She saw the Ferrari first, then Malcolm, then Jordan's uncertain expression. In the space of a few seconds, her mind arranged those details into the only story her prejudice could accept. The car was too rare. The man was too understated. The valet looked too nervous. And the gala was too important for her to risk embarrassment. Vanessa did not approach like a host welcoming a donor. She approached like a property owner finding a stranger near the silverware. Malcolm saw the change in her face before she spoke. He had seen it in boutiques, hotels, boardrooms, country clubs, and once in the lobby of a bank that held more of his money than the manager earned in a decade. It was the look of someone deciding that evidence was unnecessary because assumption felt more natural. Vanessa asked for proof before she asked for his name. She looked at his jacket, then at the Ferrari, then at the gathering crowd, as though she were protecting civilization from a clerical error. Malcolm could have ended the moment there. He could have given his full name, called the board chair, or let one of the wealthiest families in the city learn within seconds who he was. But he had not come to the gala to perform power. He had come to watch what Caldwell had become when it believed he was absent. So he did what he had done for most of his life. He stayed calm, offered the simplest truth, and watched carefully to see who would choose fairness when fairness was inconvenient. Vanessa failed that test almost immediately. Vanessa Caldwell had spent her career learning how to turn uncertainty into authority. She knew that in wealthy spaces, the person who sounded most offended often controlled the room. So when Malcolm Reed calmly explained that the Ferrari belonged to him, she treated his calmness not as evidence of innocence, but as arrogance. She insisted that the vehicle matched one recently serviced by Caldwell Prestige Motors, and because her company had sponsored the gala, she claimed a responsibility to protect its assets, its reputation, and its guests. The words sounded professional enough from a distance. Up close, they were something uglier, wearing a tailored suit. Malcolm listened without interruption. That made people uneasy. A guilty man, they expected, would panic. An innocent man, they assumed, would defend himself loudly. Malcolm did neither. He stood beside the Ferrari with the stillness of someone who had learned long ago that raising his voice would only make certain people feel justified in fearing him. He removed the registration card from a leather folder and offered it to Vanessa. She glanced at it only long enough to dismiss it. The name on the paperwork did not satisfy her because it did not match the story she had already chosen. Eleanor Reed Memorial Trust meant nothing to her except another obstacle between her accusation and the public victory she wanted. The crowd grew thicker. Guests who had come to celebrate charity now lingered for scandal. A few recorded openly. Others pretended to check messages while angling their phones toward Malcolm's face. This was how humiliation multiplied in the modern world. It no longer needed a courtroom or a newspaper. It needed only a confident liar, a silent crowd, and a camera hungry enough to turn a human being into content before the truth had time to breathe. Jordan Ellis stood near the valet podium with his hands tight at his sides. He knew something was wrong. The man beside the Ferrari did not move like a thief. He had arrived openly, not in a rush. He had spoken kindly. He had known to ask about the staff meal, a detail no ordinary guest noticed. Most importantly, Jordan had seen the registration card. He had caught the name of the trust, and something about it stirred a memory from the tuition letter he had kept folded in a shoebox at home. The grant that saved his future had come from the Eleanor Reed Memorial Trust. The same words were on the card Vanessa had just refused to believe. Jordan wanted to speak, but fear trapped him. His supervisor had warned the valet staff before the event that Vanessa Caldwell did not tolerate embarrassment. Workers who caused trouble would not be invited back. For Jordan, losing this job meant more than missing a paycheck. It meant falling behind on rent, delaying certification, maybe returning to the same dead-end work he had fought to escape. He watched Vanessa sharpen her accusation, and shame burned in him because he understood how silence could become cooperation. Inside the museum, the gala continued without understanding that its true purpose was being threatened outside the doors. Young students stood near displays of vintage engines, while donors congratulated themselves for generosity. A large banner promised a new future for overlooked talent in automotive engineering. Malcolm had funded that banner. He had funded the scholarships, the mentorship program, and the equipment grants that would follow. Yet outside, the man whose money made the evening possible was being treated as the danger. Vanessa's suspicion quickly became performance. She reminded everyone within earshot that Caldwell Prestige Motors dealt in vehicles worth more than most homes and could not afford to ignore irregularities. She emphasized that the Ferrari was a rare model, that criminals often targeted events like this, and that responsible leadership required swift action. Every sentence made her sound less like a woman seeking truth and more like someone auditioning for applause. The fact that Malcolm remained composed only irritated her further. She needed him to look guilty. She needed fear in his eyes. She needed the crowd to see what she believed she saw. When museum security arrived, Vanessa did not present uncertainty. She presented conclusion. She described Malcolm as an unauthorized individual attempting to take control of a high-value vehicle connected to her company. The words were careful, polished, and poisonous. They avoided the crudeness of open prejudice while carrying the same conclusion. This man didn't belong here, and therefore his ownership must be impossible. Malcolm again offered documentation. Again, Vanessa's certainty moved faster than anyone's willingness to verify. Security asked Malcolm to step away from the vehicle. He did. That small act of cooperation seemed to disappoint the people waiting for drama. He did not reach into his pocket suddenly. He did not challenge them with anger. He simply stepped back, folded his hands, and asked that the documents be checked before anyone treated an assumption as fact. One guard looked embarrassed. Another looked toward Vanessa, as though her title mattered more than the paperwork in Malcolm's hand. That glance told Malcolm almost everything he needed to know about the culture she had created. Vanessa noticed it too. Power teaches some people to recognize hesitation and punish it before it becomes courage. She pressed harder, reminding the guards that the entire gala was under media coverage and that any delay could become a reputational disaster. What she did not mention was that she had already created the disaster. In her mind, reputation meant controlling how things looked, not whether they were right. The first police car arrived 10 minutes later. To the crowd, it felt like confirmation. People who had been unsure now adjusted their faces into expressions of concern. Police lights have a way of turning suspicion into a script, and once that script begins, many people stop asking who wrote it. Malcolm watched the officers approach. He had known this possibility from the moment Vanessa raised her voice. He had also known that his wealth, his documents, and his education might not protect him quickly enough if the wrong person decided that his calmness was defiance. The lead officer, Daniel Price, was not cruel in the theatrical way Vanessa was cruel. His danger was quieter. He arrived with the fatigue of a man who believed he had seen enough to trust shortcuts. Vanessa gave him her version first. She did it quickly, confidently, and with just enough corporate language to sound credible. She described the Ferrari as possibly stolen from company custody, Malcolm as evasive, and the registration paperwork as suspicious. By the time Malcolm was invited to explain, he was no longer a man beside his own car. He was a suspect, attempting to overcome a story already planted. Malcolm handed over his identification and the registration card. Officer Price studied them, then studied Malcolm, then looked at Vanessa. That sequence mattered. The documents should have been the center of gravity. Instead, the officer's eyes kept returning to the woman in the expensive dress, who seemed so certain. Malcolm recognized the old imbalance. Paper was supposed to speak equally for everyone, but in the real world, paper often needed a powerful person to read it honestly. Vanessa grew bolder when she sensed the officer's uncertainty. She claimed there had been internal alerts about inventory irregularities at a Caldwell service facility. That part was not entirely false, which made the lie more dangerous. There had been irregularities, but they were not caused by Malcolm. They were caused by Vanessa's own pressure on employees to move vehicles and records in ways that made quarterly reports look cleaner than they were. One of those records involved a Ferrari recently serviced under a trust account. Vanessa had seen the paperwork days earlier and ignored the owner's name because she was focused on something else, hiding the fact that charity funds and service charges had been shifted between accounts before the merger review. The Ferrari, in other words, was not evidence of Malcolm's crime. It was evidence of Vanessa's panic. But no one outside the museum knew that yet. All they saw was a black man being questioned beside a car they assumed belonged to someone richer, louder, and more expected. Officer Price asked Malcolm why he had come to the event. Malcolm explained that he had been invited. Vanessa challenged that immediately, claiming she had personally reviewed the VIP list and did not recall seeing his name. She made memory sound like proof. Malcolm did not argue. He simply provided the digital invitation stored on his phone. Vanessa leaned in, saw the donor access credential, and for the first time a flicker of concern crossed her face. It disappeared quickly, but Malcolm saw it. The credential did not list him as Malcolm Reed. It listed him under the name of the trust. That was by his own design. For years, he had preferred the work to be recognized, not the man behind it. But now the privacy that had protected his peace gave Vanessa room to attack him. She suggested the invitation could have been obtained improperly. She suggested the trust name could be used as cover. She suggested anything that kept her from admitting the simplest possibility, that she had been wrong from the beginning. A younger officer asked whether someone from Caldwell's headquarters could verify the service records. Vanessa answered before Malcolm could. She insisted that she was the highest-ranking Caldwell executive present, and that her judgment should be sufficient until the vehicle could be impounded. The word impounded moved through the crowd like a spark. Phones lifted higher. Jordan's face tightened. Malcolm looked toward the Ferrari, not because he feared losing it, but because the thought of that car being dragged away under suspicion felt like an insult to Eleanor's memory. He remembered the day the Ferrari arrived. He had stood alone in the delivery room, while the dealer representative explained features Malcolm already understood better than he did. The car had gleamed beneath the lights, but Malcolm had not touched the steering wheel right away. He had placed his hand on the seat beside him, imagining Eleanor there, teasing him for pretending not to be emotional. He had whispered nothing aloud. He had only breathed through grief and gratitude until both became too large to separate. Now Vanessa was turning that memory into evidence of theft, and the cruelty of it settled deeper than her words. Still, Malcolm remained calm. Not because he felt nothing, but because he felt too much to waste it on spectacle. He asked Officer Price to contact the registration authority, the insurer, and the attorney listed on the trust documents. He also asked that the vehicle not be touched until its ownership was verified. The requests were reasonable. Vanessa treated them as manipulation. She accused him of trying to delay accountability and warned the officers that sophisticated thieves often used paperwork to confuse law enforcement. That phrase pleased her. It made prejudice sound like expertise. The situation might have turned then if Jordan had found his courage sooner. He stepped forward halfway, then stopped when Vanessa's assistant, a thin man named Miles Voss, moved beside him and quietly reminded him that temporary staff were replaceable. Miles did not need to raise his voice. Fear does not require volume when the power imbalance is clear. Jordan swallowed what he knew and stepped back. Malcolm saw the exchange. He did not blame the young man. He had once been young enough to know how expensive courage could be. Inside the museum, the gala program was nearing the scholarship announcement. Vanessa was supposed to appear on stage in 15 minutes. She knew that if Malcolm was still outside, if police were still questioning him, if guests kept filming, the evening would become impossible to control. So she made the choice that revealed her more clearly than anything she had said. She urged the officers to remove him from the entrance before donors became uncomfortable. Not before the truth was verified. Not before paperwork was checked. Before donors became uncomfortable. That was the moment Malcolm understood that Vanessa had to be removed from Caldwell, not merely corrected. A person who valued donor comfort over human dignity could not be trusted with a scholarship fund built for overlooked students. A leader who saw humiliation as a branding problem could not protect employees who lacked power. Malcolm had come to observe. Vanessa had given him the answer. Officer Price asked Malcolm to place his hands where they could be seen while they sorted things out. The request was framed as procedure, but procedure can feel very different depending on whose body carries the risk. The crowd grew silent in the way crowds do when they know something wrong is happening, but want permission from authority before admitting it. Malcolm complied. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. He could feel Eleanor's initials inside the car behind him. He could feel old memories rising. The bank lobby, the hotel elevator, the showroom where a salesman once assumed he was the driver for someone else. Each memory carried the same message. Prove you belong. Prove you are not a threat. Prove you own what you built. Then Jordan finally moved. He did not shout. He did not make a grand speech. He stepped toward Officer Price with his hands trembling and explained that he had seen the registration card, that the trust name matched the scholarship donor materials, and that Malcolm had arrived as an invited guest. His voice shook, but truth does not need to be fearless to matter. Vanessa turned on him instantly. She accused him of interfering in a police matter and warned that his employment would be reviewed. The threat landed exactly where she aimed it. Jordan went pale, but he did not step back this time. That small act changed the air. One of the younger scholarship applicants inside the museum noticed the commotion through the glass. Then another. Soon, several students moved toward the entrance, drawn not by gossip, but by the uneasy recognition that the man outside looked more like their fathers, uncles, neighbors, and future selves than anyone on the gala stage. They had come to be celebrated by a company claiming to believe in overlooked talent. Now they were watching that company's acting CEO overlook truth in real time. Malcolm looked at Jordan with gratitude, but not surprise. Courage often begins as a whisper. He knew that. He also knew Vanessa would punish the young man if she survived the night with power intact. So Malcolm made one final request, this time not to the officer, but to the process itself. He asked that his attorney be contacted immediately and that the board chair of Caldwell Prestige Motors be informed that the trust's representative was being detained at the entrance of the event, funded by that same trust. Vanessa laughed at the phrase trust's representative, not loudly, but with enough contempt for those closest to hear. She thought Malcolm was dressing himself in legal language to escape consequence. She did not understand that he had just given her one last chance to pause before stepping over the edge. Officer Price, still unsure but increasingly aware that the situation was more complicated than Vanessa had claimed, allowed Malcolm to make a call. Malcolm did not call a friend to rescue him emotionally. He called Amina Pierce, the attorney who had protected his interests for 15 years and who had warned him that Vanessa Caldwell's ambition had finally become dangerous. He gave her only a few calm details: the museum entrance, the Ferrari, the attempted impound, the presence of police, and Vanessa's refusal to verify ownership. Amina did not need more. She had been waiting for the machine to expose its broken part. While they waited, Vanessa tried to reclaim control by moving the event forward. She instructed Miles to inform the stage manager that the scholarship announcement would be delayed due to a security issue. That phrase spread quickly through staff radios. Security issue. It sounded clean. It sounded neutral. It erased Malcolm's name, Vanessa's accusation, Jordan's courage, and the simple fact that the only danger present had been created by a woman who mistook her bias for leadership. Minutes passed. The crowd shifted. The police checked the license plate and found no stolen vehicle report. They checked Malcolm's identification and found no warrant, no record, no reason to restrain him. But Vanessa kept insisting that internal company records raised concern. She promised documentation from Caldwell's system, and Miles hurried to retrieve a tablet. When he returned, the record he showed listed the Ferrari as pending corporate hold. It looked official enough to confuse the officers. It was also false, altered that afternoon by someone using executive access. Malcolm saw the screen and understood. The accusation was no longer just prejudice. It was fraud being improvised in public. For the first time that evening, his expression changed. Not into anger, not exactly, but into something colder. Disappointment, sharpened by certainty. Vanessa mistook it for fear and pressed forward, urging the officers to detain him until the discrepancy could be resolved. Officer Price reached for his cuffs, not with eagerness, but with the weary surrender of a man letting a flawed process carry him. Jordan stepped forward again, but a security guard blocked him. Several guests began recording closer. Vanessa's eyes brightened with victory. And in that suspended moment, as Malcolm Reed stood beside the Ferrari that carried his wife's initials, with one officer preparing to turn assumption into restraint, the glass doors of the museum opened behind the crowd. A woman in a gray suit entered with a leather case in one hand and the expression of someone who had not come to negotiate. Behind her walked Bernard Hayes, the board chair Vanessa had been trying to avoid for months, and Marisol Chen, Caldwell's chief financial officer, carrying a folder thick enough to end careers. Vanessa saw them and went still. Malcolm did not smile. He simply lowered his hands and waited for the truth to arrive. Amina Pierce did not need to raise her voice to take control of the entrance. Some people carry authority like jewelry, bright and decorative, meant to be noticed before it is useful. Amina carried it like a blade kept sharp in silence. She moved through the crowd without asking anyone to step aside, and still they did. Bernard Hayes followed with the exhausted look of a man who had ignored too many warning signs and was now watching them gather into proof. Marisol Chen kept her eyes on Vanessa, not with hatred, but with the clean sadness of someone who had finally confirmed what she had feared. Vanessa recovered first, or tried to. She spoke to Bernard as though this were merely an unfortunate misunderstanding caused by an uncooperative guest. She framed the police presence as a necessary precaution. She described Malcolm as evasive, the Ferrari as suspicious, and the altered company record as justification for every humiliating second that had passed. But her words no longer landed with the same force. Power depends on the room believing you are the highest authority present. Vanessa had just lost that illusion. Amina asked Officer Price to review the documents in her case before any further action was taken. This time, no one dismissed the paperwork. The first document established the Ferrari's ownership. The vehicle had been purchased legally, insured properly, and registered through the Eleanor Reed Memorial Trust. The VIN matched, the title matched, the insurance matched, the trust documents matched. There was no theft, no unauthorized possession, no legal basis for impoundment. The car belonged to the trust, and Malcolm Reed was its managing trustee. Officer Price's face changed as he read. It was not dramatic, but it was visible. The confidence he had borrowed from Vanessa drained away, leaving behind the discomfort of a man realizing he had nearly placed handcuffs on an innocent person because someone wealthy had sounded certain. He returned Malcolm's identification with a formality that could not repair the damage, but at least stopped it from growing. The younger officer looked relieved. The security guards looked away. Vanessa refused to surrender. She shifted from accusation to confusion, insisting that the internal Caldwell record still listed the car under corporate hold. Marisol Chen opened her folder. That was the moment Vanessa's fear became unmistakable. Marisol had spent weeks tracing irregular entries across Caldwell's systems. At first, she had believed the problem was sloppy management under pressure from the proposed merger. Then she found the charity transfers. Then, the delayed warranty reimbursements. Then, the executive overrides attached to vehicles used as collateral in internal reports. Finally, that afternoon, she saw the Ferrari record altered less than an hour before Malcolm arrived at the gala. The alteration had not been made by a clerk. It had been made through executive credentials assigned to Vanessa Caldwell's office. The crowd did not understand every technical detail, but they understood enough. They understood that the document Vanessa had used to justify suspicion had been changed from inside her own system. They understood that the man she had accused had shown real paperwork, while she had relied on a record that now looked manufactured. Most of all, they understood that the story they had been recording was not the one they thought. Their phones remained raised, but the mood behind them changed. Curiosity became recognition. Recognition became shame. Vanessa tried to blame Miles. Miles looked as though his soul had left him standing there with a tablet in his hands. For months, he had obeyed her, softened her threats into emails, arranged her meetings, and watched her treat fear as a management tool. Now, with police present and the board chair listening, loyalty became too expensive. He admitted that Vanessa had ordered him to pull the Ferrari's service history and flag it before the gala, claiming she needed leverage over an unnamed trust donor who might oppose the merger. He had not known she would turn that flag into a police accusation. That did not make him innocent, but it made the machinery visible. Bernard Hayes closed his eyes for a moment. Malcolm watched him carefully. Bernard was not a villain, but cowardice in a boardroom can create space for villains to operate. He had allowed Vanessa's aggression because profits had risen. He had accepted her explanations because asking harder questions would have delayed the merger. He had told himself that leadership sometimes required sharp edges. Now those sharp edges had been turned on the very person whose trust kept Caldwell alive. Amina then presented the second set of documents. These were not about the Ferrari. They were about control. The Eleanor Reed Memorial Trust held the controlling interest in Reed Caldwell Holdings, the private entity that owned the majority of Caldwell Prestige Motors. Through that trust, Malcolm Reed possessed the authority Vanessa had spent months pretending she held without limits. He was not a random guest. He was not merely a donor. He was not an outsider trying to impress anyone with a sports car. He was the hidden founder, the principal owner, and the final vote on the merger Vanessa had built her future around. The silence that followed was deeper than the earlier silence. Earlier, people had been quiet because they were waiting to see a man punished. Now they were quiet because they understood. They had watched the owner of the company be treated like a criminal by his own acting CEO. Vanessa stared at Malcolm as if seeing him for the first time made the world unfair to her. That is the strange arrogance of people who judge too quickly. They are not horrified by the harm they caused. They are offended that the person they harmed turned out to have power. In her face, Malcolm saw no real remorse, only calculation collapsing. She was not thinking about the insult to his dignity. She was thinking about the merger bonus slipping away, the board votes dissolving, the headlines forming, and the video evidence spreading faster than her lawyers could contain it. Malcolm finally spoke, but even then, he did not perform anger for the crowd. He made it clear, in a measured way, that the issue had never been whether he could prove he owned the Ferrari. The issue was, what would have happened if he could not? What if he had been a mechanic, borrowing a customer's car with permission? What if he had been a young student from the scholarship program standing beside a vehicle he had been asked to move? What if he had been Jordan, or any worker whose documents were not enough to overcome a powerful person's assumption? Malcolm's calmness forced the crowd to confront the truth Vanessa had tried to hide behind procedure. The problem was not a misunderstanding. It was a system in which certain people were believed first, and others were forced to survive the consequences. Jordan stood near the valet podium, barely breathing. When Malcolm's eyes found him, the young man looked down, ashamed that he had hesitated. Malcolm did not let that shame settle. He acknowledged Jordan's courage in front of everyone, not as a dramatic reward, but as a correction. The first person at that entrance who had tried to protect the truth had not been a board member, an officer, or an executive. It had been a young valet with the most to lose. That fact embarrassed the powerful more than any speech could have. Vanessa attempted one last defense. She claimed she had acted out of concern for company property, but that argument collapsed under its own weight. Amina reminded the officers and the board that concern for property did not explain why Vanessa ignored valid registration, threatened a witness, pushed for impoundment before verification, or used an altered internal record. Marisol added the financial findings. Transfers from the scholarship event budget to consultant accounts tied to the merger campaign, delayed vendor payments hidden under administrative review, and pressure placed on employees who questioned the numbers. The Ferrari incident had exposed the pattern because Vanessa, in her haste to humiliate Malcolm, had reached for the same tools she used everywhere else: intimidation, optics, and manipulated records. Poetic justice does not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives as a board chair asking for a badge to be surrendered. Bernard removed Vanessa as acting CEO on the spot, pending a formal investigation. The words were quiet, but they struck harder than any public insult she had thrown at Malcolm. The title she had used as a weapon disappeared in front of the same crowd she had tried to impress. Her access to company systems was suspended. The merger vote was postponed indefinitely. The police opened a separate inquiry into the altered record, and the charity fund she had treated as a branding tool was placed under independent protection by the trust she had mocked. Vanessa's face hardened as she realized there would be no graceful exit. Minutes earlier, she had wanted Malcolm removed from the entrance so donors would not feel uncomfortable. Now donors watched as she was escorted away from the gala she had planned to dominate. She had accused Malcolm of not belonging beside the Ferrari. In the end, she was the one who no longer belonged in the building. The same cameras she had welcomed for publicity captured her fall. The same crowd she had tried to command stepped back from her, as though arrogance itself had become contagious. Malcolm did not celebrate. That disappointed some people watching, but it revealed the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge would have demanded humiliation equal to the humiliation Vanessa had attempted. Justice required something more difficult and more lasting. Malcolm wanted the company repaired. He wanted the scholarship protected. He wanted employees free from fear. He wanted the students inside the museum to remember the night, not only as the night a powerful woman was exposed, but as the night a promise survived. The gala did not end. That was Malcolm's decision. Vanessa's removal created chaos, but Malcolm refused to let her failure become the students' punishment. After a delay, the guests were invited back into the main hall. The mood had changed completely. The champagne seemed less important. The speeches sounded thinner. People who had arrived expecting a pleasant evening of charity now carried the uncomfortable knowledge that charity without dignity is only decoration. When Malcolm entered the hall, he did not enter like a conquering hero. He entered slowly, with Jordan beside him and Amina a few steps behind. The red Ferrari remained outside under the lights, no longer a symbol of suspicion, but of everything people had failed to see. Inside the museum, the scholarship applicants watched him with a different kind of attention. Earlier, Some had wondered whether they belonged in such a polished room. Now they had seen the man who funded the room nearly thrown out of it. The lesson was painful, but it was also powerful. Belonging, they learned, is not always granted by the people guarding the door. Bernard Hayes took the stage first and admitted, with visible difficulty, that the evening's program had nearly been overshadowed by a failure of leadership. He did not reveal every legal detail, but he acknowledged enough for the room to understand that an apology was owed. Then Malcolm was introduced properly, not as a mysterious donor, not as a trust representative, but as the founder whose principles had shaped Caldwell before ambition distorted them. Some guests applauded too quickly, eager to move from discomfort to redemption. Malcolm let the applause fade before the room could use it to absolve itself. He did not give them the speech they expected. He did not describe his net worth. He did not tell a triumphant story about proving people wrong. Instead, he spoke about Eleanor. He spoke about a woman who believed talent often lives where opportunity refuses to look. He spoke about young mechanics who learn precision from necessity, about students who work night shifts before morning classes, about parents who sacrifice quietly so their children can build something better. He made the room understand that the scholarship was not a public relations gesture. It was a debt paid forward. As he spoke, the meaning of the Ferrari changed again. It was no longer merely a luxury car or even evidence in a public accusation. It became part of a love story. Malcolm explained, without turning grief into spectacle, that the car carried Eleanor's initials because she had taught him to honor the dreams he once felt embarrassed to admit. She had believed that a boy from a forgotten garage could one day own beauty without apologizing for it. The room grew still, not with scandal this time, but with tenderness. Even those who had recorded his humiliation lowered their phones. The scholarship recipients were announced one by one. Jordan was not on the original list because he had already received support through the technical grant program years earlier. But by the end of the evening, Malcolm expanded the initiative. A new fellowship would be created for working students already inside the automotive industry, young people balancing jobs, training, and family obligations. Jordan would become its first mentor trainee, with full tuition support, paid certification leave, and a permanent position in Caldwell's technical development program if he chose it. The announcement was not charity tossed at him for good behavior. It was recognition of what courage had revealed. In the weeks that followed, the video spread far beyond the city. At first, people shared the most dramatic clip. Vanessa accusing Malcolm, the police lights flashing against the Ferrari, the moment Amina arrived with documents. But as longer footage emerged, the conversation changed. Viewers noticed Jordan trying to speak. They noticed Malcolm offering paperwork again and again. They noticed how quickly the crowd believed suspicion when it was spoken by someone expensive. The story became bigger than a Ferrari, bigger than a CEO losing her title, bigger even than one man's vindication. It became a mirror. Caldwell Prestige Motors underwent a reckoning. Malcolm did not burn the company down. He rebuilt its foundation in public. The proposed merger was canceled. An independent audit confirmed misuse of event funds and improper manipulation of internal records. Vanessa faced civil claims, regulatory scrutiny, and the permanent collapse of the image she had curated so carefully. Miles cooperated with investigators and was dismissed from his role. Bernard Hayes resigned from the board after admitting that oversight had failed under his leadership. Marisol Chen was appointed interim president, Not because she was flawless, but because she had chosen the truth when silence would have protected her career. The company changed in ways that mattered. Employees received a protected channel for reporting misconduct. Valet workers, porters, mechanics, and junior staff were included in dignity and escalation policies that were not just printed in handbooks, but enforced. Customer contracts were rewritten in plain language. Warranty claims were reviewed. The scholarship fund was expanded and placed under a separate board that included educators, technicians, and former recipients. Malcolm insisted that the people most often ignored by luxury businesses should have a voice in how those businesses measured integrity. As for the Ferrari, Malcolm kept driving it, but not often. He brought it to the museum once each year for the scholarship ceremony, parking it not behind velvet ropes, but near the student entrance, where young people could see it up close. He allowed them to ask questions about the engine, the design, the balance between power and control. He loved those questions because they came from curiosity, not envy. He wanted them to understand that beauty did not belong only to those born near it. It could be studied, built, earned, and honored. 1 year after the incident, a small plaque was installed at the Meridian Auto Museum beside the scholarship wall. It bore Eleanor Reed's name, Malcolm Reed's name, and a sentence simple enough to be remembered by everyone who passed it. It said that dignity is the first door opportunity must open. Malcolm stood before that plaque for a long time after the ceremony ended. No cameras surrounded him then. No crowd demanded a reaction. Jordan, now wearing a technician's jacket instead of a valet uniform, stood nearby and said nothing, because some moments are too full for speech. Malcolm thought about the night Vanessa tried to reduce him to a suspect beside his own car. He thought about the officers, the crowd, the phones, the silence. He thought about how close the truth had come to being delayed by confidence, title, and assumption. He knew that his wealth had helped protect him. His attorney had arrived. His documents had been recognized. His ownership had been too large to ignore. But he also knew that many people never get that kind of rescue. Their truth is smaller on paper, easier to dismiss, and less profitable for strangers to defend. That knowledge kept him humble. It also kept him working. Vanessa eventually faded from headlines, though consequences followed her longer than attention did. She tried to rebuild her reputation through carefully worded statements about stress, misunderstanding, and procedural confusion. But the public had seen too much. More importantly, investigators had seen enough. The world she had built out of image could not survive contact with evidence. For a woman who had valued reputation above character, the punishment was brutally fitting. She had spent years polishing a name while neglecting the truth beneath it. In the end, the name tarnished exactly where the truth had been ignored. Malcolm never said he forgave her publicly. He also never let bitterness become his legacy. Eleanor had taught him that justice should protect the future, not merely punish the past. So he chose to build. He built scholarships. He built protections. He built a company where a young worker could challenge an executive without risking everything. He built the kind of door he wished had opened more easily when he was young. And the red Ferrari remained what it had always been, no matter what Vanessa tried to make it. Not proof of arrogance, not an invitation to envy, not a symbol that one man had become better than anyone else. It was a promise kept. It was a reminder that a boy who once fixed engines under weak garage lights had lived long enough to honor the woman who believed in him. was also a warning to anyone who judged ownership by appearance, intelligence by accent, dignity by clothing, or worth by the comfort of their assumptions. Because sometimes the quiet man beside the car is not lost. Sometimes he is not lucky. Sometimes he's not trying to impress anyone at all. Sometimes he is the one who built the road, paid for the lights, opened the doors, and still waits patiently to see who will treat him with respect before they know his name. So the next time you see someone standing where you do not expect them to stand, pause before you turn your assumption into a sentence over their life. The truth does not become smaller because it arrives quietly. Dignity does not disappear because someone powerful refuses to recognize it. And kindness, when protected by courage, can outlast arrogance every single time. If this story reminded you that no one should have to prove their humanity before being treated with respect, leave a like, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and tell us in the comments whether you think Malcolm gave Vanessa exactly the justice she deserved.